Hi guys. Tonight we're stepping into a world of dust, mountains, rushing rivers, and distant horizons, where the American West is about to change forever. You stand beside a cold stream flowing down from the Sierra Nevada. The water sparkles beneath the morning sun. Pine trees sway gently above you. Somewhere nearby, a shovel bites into wet earth. A man bends over the riverbank, searching for something small enough to fit in his palm, yet powerful enough to reshape history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in for tonight's journey, feel free to share your location and local time in the comments below. It is always fascinating to see where fellow history lovers are listening from around the world. Now, dim the lights. The year is 1848. At first, the place feels impossibly remote. California sits far from the crowded cities of the eastern United States. The journey here takes months. Maps remain incomplete. News travels slowly. Most Americans will never see these mountains. Yet everything is about to change. You stand near a sawmill owned by a man named John Sutter. Workers labor beside the American River. The air smells of damp wood and freshly cut timber. Water rushes through channels built to power machinery. The settlement itself seems ordinary enough. Then comes a discovery. A worker named James Marshall notices bright flakes in the water. At first, he wonders whether they might simply be something shiny. But curiosity grows. Tests follow. Soon a startling possibility emerges. Gold. Tiny pieces at first, then more and more. The news spreads cautiously because Sutter hopes to keep the discovery quiet. He dreams of building an agricultural empire. Gold seekers would only disrupt those plans. For a brief moment, a handful of men share an extraordinary secret. It does not remain secret for long. Your mind drifts through those first months when rumors move faster than official announcements. Travelers carry stories. Sailors repeat whispers in distant ports. Merchants hear astonishing claims from customers. Each retelling adds a little more excitement. Gold in California. Gold lying in riverbeds. Gold waiting to be collected. Many listeners today imagine the gold rush as a sudden explosion. In reality, the news spread gradually at first, yet once it gained momentum, it became nearly impossible to stop. Historical records show that by late 1848, reports had reached major American cities. Newspapers began printing remarkable accounts. Government officials investigated. The evidence proved convincing. One widely accepted historical fact appears in correspondence and official reports from the period. President James Polk publicly confirmed the gold discoveries in late 1848. After reviewing reliable information from military officers and government representatives. His confirmation helped convince many skeptical Americans that the stories were true. You can almost picture families gathered around newspapers. Some stare in disbelief, others begin making plans immediately. The emotional pull is powerful. Life in the eastern states often feels predictable. Many people work long hours for modest rewards. Economic uncertainty remains common. Land can be expensive. Opportunities seem limited. Then comes the promise of sudden wealth. Not guaranteed wealth, just possible wealth. That possibility changes everything. The sound of horse hooves echoes through muddy streets. Merchants discuss routes westward. Young men dream of fortunes. Older men dream of second chances. Even some who have never traveled far from home begin imagining a different future. The temptation proves irresistible. You walk through towns where blacksmiths, farmers, clerks, and laborers all ask the same question. What if the stories are true? What if a few months of hardship could bring lifelong prosperity? What if fortune waits beyond the horizon? The questions spread like wildfire. A fascinating detail often gets overlooked. Many people who rushed west never expected to remain there permanently. They imagined a temporary adventure. They would find gold, become rich, and return home. History had other plans. Many would stay. Many would fail. Some would thrive. Few could predict which outcome awaited them. The winter of 1848 slowly gives way to 1849. The famous year approaches. Soon thousands of fortune seekers will become known as 49ers. For now, though, you stand at the beginning. The frontier still feels vast and uncertain. The roads remain rough. The distances remain intimidating, yet the first great wave is gathering strength. You notice another important reality. California itself is changing politically. The region had recently become part of the United States following the Mexican-American War. Authority remains limited in many areas. Institutions are still developing. Population numbers remain relatively small. Gold arrives before stable systems can fully emerge. The timing matters enormously. Imagine trying to govern a region when tens of thousands of newcomers suddenly appear. It is not easy. Some historians point to this unusual combination of factors. A newly acquired territory, weak governmental structures, immense natural resources, and rapid migration created conditions unlike almost anything else in American history. Exactly how much the gold rush accelerated national development remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Researchers at institutions including Stanford University and the University of California have explored different interpretations. Historians still debate whether California's transformation would have occurred quickly, even without gold, or whether the discoveries dramatically accelerated changes that otherwise might have taken decades. The debate continues. The impact remains undeniable as weeks pass. Ships begin filling with passengers, trails become busier, merchants recognize opportunities of their own. After all, not everyone intends to dig for gold. Some intend to sell supplies. That often proves wiser. A shovel seller can profit regardless of who finds treasure. The same applies to merchants, transport operators, innkeepers, and traders. You begin noticing something important about frontier history. Wealth often flows toward those supporting the dream rather than those chasing it directly. Human nature rarely changes. Excitement creates markets. Markets create opportunities. Opportunities attract people. The cycle grows stronger with each passing month. Your thoughts follow one young traveler preparing for departure. His belongings fit into a few bags. His boots are worn, his savings are limited, yet his imagination is overflowing. He studies maps by candlelight. The flame flickers softly. Paper rustles in the quiet room outside. Winter winds move through dark streets. He knows the journey will be dangerous. Disease, accidents, weather, and simple bad luck threaten every traveler. Yet he keeps planning, because hope is difficult to resist. Across the nation, thousands experience the same feeling. The West begins pulling people toward it with remarkable force. Not merely because of gold itself, because of what gold represents: freedom, opportunity, reinvention, a chance to become someone new. You pause beside the river once more. The water continues flowing exactly as it did before the discovery. Birds still sing among the trees. Mountain air remains cool and clean. Nature itself seems unchanged, yet history has shifted. The first spark has been lit. Soon wagon trains will roll westward. Boomtowns will appear almost overnight. Cowboys, outlaws, merchants, lawmen, settlers, and dreamers will help create the world later remembered as the Wild West. But all of that remains ahead. For now, you simply watch the river. A few golden flakes gleam beneath the moving water. Small enough to fit inside a hand, powerful enough to transform a continent. The river remains behind you now, but its consequences travel everywhere as 1849 dawns. The excitement unleashed by California gold grows into something far larger than a local discovery. What began as scattered rumors becomes a migration unlike anything most Americans have ever witnessed, across cities, villages, farms, and river ports. People find themselves staring westward. The journey ahead is immense. Yet thousands decide to attempt it anyway. You stand on a crowded dock along the eastern seaboard. Salt air drifts across the harbor. Ship rigging creaks overhead. Sailors shout orders while passengers haul trunks, blankets, tools, and provisions aboard vessels bound for distant horizons. Everywhere you look, faces reveal anticipation and uncertainty. Many travelers know surprisingly little about California. Maps remain imperfect, Reliable information is scarce. Newspapers often exaggerate success stories, yet facts seem almost secondary now. The dream itself is enough. A farmer sells his property and invests everything in the journey. A carpenter leaves behind steady employment. Young clerks abandon counting houses. Laborers quit jobs without hesitation. Some men say farewell to wives and children, promising to return rich within a year. Many sincerely believe it. Some never come back. Your attention shifts toward the overland routes crossing the continent. The journey west is not simply long, it is exhausting. Wagon trains gather throughout the spring. Families and fortune seekers prepare supplies carefully because mistakes can prove fatal. Flour, salt pork, coffee, beans, tools, extra wagon parts. Every item matters. The landscape waiting ahead is enormous. You move with one wagon train leaving Missouri. The wheels groan across uneven ground. Horses snort in the cool morning air. Leather harnesses creak rhythmically as the procession inches westward. The first days feel almost pleasant. Green grass stretches toward distant hills. Streams provide fresh water. Spirits remain high. Travelers exchange stories around evening campfires. For a while, optimism outweighs hardship. Then reality begins asserting itself. Dust becomes a constant companion. The dust covers clothing. The dust fills mouths. The dust settles inside wagons and blankets. Day after day, travelers inhale it. Children grow restless. Animals become exhausted. Tempers occasionally flare. Yet the line of wagons continues moving west. The scale is difficult to imagine. Thousands of people are traveling simultaneously. Some choose sea routes around South America. Others cross Panama before catching ships northward. Many endure the overland trails stretching across plains, deserts, and mountains. Each route carries dangers. Each route demands sacrifice. For a moment, it feels as though the entire nation is in motion. One widely accepted historical fact emerges clearly from surviving records. By 1850, California's non-native population had grown dramatically due to migration associated with the gold rush. Modern historians regard this as one of the most rapid population increases in American history. The transformation is astonishing. Places that recently seemed remote now attract global attention. Not merely national attention, global attention. Your mind drifts toward distant ports around the world. News of California reaches Europe, South America, Australia, and Asia. Soon ships arrive carrying passengers speaking different languages and bringing different customs. The Wild West is becoming international. This surprises many people today. The popular image often focuses on American pioneers alone. Yet, California quickly becomes a meeting point for migrants from many regions. Different cultures, traditions, and ambitions collide in mining camps and frontier settlements. The result is complicated. Sometimes cooperation emerges. Sometimes conflict follows. Human nature travels west alongside everyone else. The wagon train reaches the Great Plains. The landscape opens dramatically. Grass waves beneath endless skies. Clouds drift across horizons so vast they seem almost unreal. You feel both inspired and humbled. The continent suddenly appears much larger than maps suggest. Days pass, then weeks. The routine becomes familiar. Wake before sunrise. Tend animals, repair equipment, travel for hours, establish camp, sleep briefly, repeat. It sounds simple. It never feels simple. A broken axle can delay an entire group. Illness spreads quickly in crowded conditions. Water sources occasionally prove unreliable. Sudden storms appear without warning. One evening, dark clouds gather overhead. Rain begins softly, then intensifies. Soon the road becomes thick mud. Wagons struggle forward. Boots sink into wet ground. Blankets grow damp. Campfires sputter and fail. The mood changes noticeably. Hope remains alive. Comfort disappears. You notice an intimate detail often preserved in diaries from the era. Many travelers become deeply attached to their animals. Horses, mules, and oxen are not merely property. They are companions, workers, and sometimes lifelines. When an animal dies, the emotional impact can be profound. The journey demands resilience from every living creature involved. Morning eventually returns. Wet canvas glistens beneath pale sunlight. Travelers dry clothing and continue onward. Progress may be slow, but stopping entirely is rarely an option. California waits ahead, or at least the idea of California waits ahead. Sometimes that distinction matters. As weeks become months, expectations begin changing. Some travelers still dream of finding gold immediately. Others grow more realistic. They begin recognizing that success will require persistence and luck. The frontier teaches lessons quickly. Not always gently, you hear conversations around campfires discussing routes, rumors, and opportunities. One traveler claims rivers contain unlimited gold. Another insists the richest deposits are already gone. Someone else predicts fortunes from farming rather than mining. No clear agreement exists. Information remains unreliable in many ways. Uncertainty becomes the defining feature of the migration. Modern researchers studying emigrant diaries have noted this constant tension between hope and ignorance. Historical records reveal that many travelers possessed only fragmented knowledge about destinations they pursued with remarkable determination. Yet they kept moving. That persistence remains extraordinary. Some historians associated with institutions such as Harvard University and Yale University have examined whether economic motivations alone explain the migration. Historians continue debating the relative importance of financial ambition, personal adventure, social pressure, and national expansion in motivating participants. The evidence suggests a mixture of factors. Human decisions rarely emerge from a single cause. A young man might seek wealth. He might also crave independence. He might want status. He might simply want a story worth telling. The motivations blend together. Late one evening, you sit beside a fading campfire. Wood smoke drifts upward into the darkness. Nearby, wagons form loose circles. Soft conversations gradually disappear as travelers settle into sleep. Above them stretches an ocean of stars. The silence feels immense. Somewhere beyond distant mountains lies California. No one around the fire knows exactly what awaits. Perhaps riches, perhaps disappointment, perhaps an entirely different life. That uncertainty creates a strange emotional mixture. Fear and excitement become nearly indistinguishable. The unknown feels intimidating, yet irresistible. The West is beginning to work its peculiar magic, not because it guarantees success, because it offers possibility. And possibility can be powerful enough to move entire populations across a continent. The wheels continue turning. The trails continue filling. The migration gathers momentum with every passing mile. Ahead lie mining camps, boomtowns, frontier settlements, and the rough beginnings of a new society. For now, though, the journey itself remains the story. A long road, a distant horizon, and thousands of dreamers moving steadily toward it. The wagon trails eventually end, but the movement does not. As more travelers reach California, the landscape begins changing before your eyes. Valleys that recently held only scattered settlements suddenly fill with tents. Wagons, tools, animals, and people. Rivers, once known mainly to local inhabitants, now attract crowds from around the world. The transformation happens with astonishing speed, almost overnight. New communities appear. Most are not planned. Few are organized, yet they grow anyway. You arrive at one of these emerging settlements during the height of the gold rush. From a distance, it looks like a patchwork of canvas and wood spread across a dusty hillside. Smoke rises from hundreds of campfires. Voices drift through the air. The sound of hammers never seems to stop. Everywhere, people are building something, or searching for something, or hoping for something. The town itself seems uncertain whether it will survive another month. Yet newcomers keep arriving. That alone is enough to keep it alive. The streets are little more than dirt paths. After rain, they become muddy channels crowded with boots and wagon wheels. During dry weather, dust hangs in the air so thickly that distant buildings appear blurred. The smell is unforgettable. Wood smoke, sweaty horses, freshly cut lumber, cooking fires, wet canvas, human ambition, all mixed together. Your attention moves toward a row of makeshift businesses. A merchant sells shovels at prices that would have seemed absurd only months earlier. Nearby, another trader offers boots, blankets, coffee, and bacon. Customers crowd every counter. Many miners spend money almost as quickly as they earn it, sometimes faster. This creates opportunities for entrepreneurs. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive historical records is that many of the most reliable fortunes of the gold rush came not from mining itself, but from supplying miners with goods and services. Merchants, transportation operators, and business owners often enjoyed greater financial stability than those searching directly for gold. The lesson appears repeatedly throughout frontier history. Dreams create demand. Demand creates business. Business creates wealth. You continue walking through the settlement. Some structures consist only of tents. Others are crude wooden cabins assembled from whatever materials happen to be available. Construction occurs constantly. Boards are carried through streets. Nails disappear almost instantly from store shelves. Nothing feels permanent, yet everything feels urgent. People are building faster than they can plan. The emotional atmosphere is fascinating. Excitement remains everywhere, but so does anxiety. Every resident seems caught between confidence and uncertainty. A miner celebrates a successful day beside the river. Another quietly realizes he has found almost nothing after weeks of effort. One man purchases expensive supplies because he expects future riches. Another sells his remaining possessions to survive another month. Fortunes rise and fall rapidly. The town reflects those changes. For a moment, it feels as though luck itself has become visible. A strong sensory moment unfolds near sunset. Golden light spreads across the settlement. Dust glows softly in the evening air. Hammering gradually slows. Campfires begin appearing one by one. The sounds of labor fade into conversations and laughter. The town almost seems peaceful. Almost. Because beneath the surface lies constant tension. No one knows how long the prosperity will last. The uncertainty shapes daily behavior. People work harder. They take greater risks. They seize opportunities quickly because tomorrow feels unpredictable. You notice something surprisingly human amid all the chaos. Many newcomers feel lonely. Historical accounts often focus on fortunes and failures, but personal letters reveal another reality. Thousands of migrants have left families behind. They miss familiar places. They miss familiar faces. The frontier can feel crowded and isolated at the same time. Around campfires, strangers become friends remarkably quickly. Shared hardship encourages connection. Stories are exchanged. Meals are shared. Partnerships form. Some last a lifetime. Others dissolve within weeks. The town keeps growing. Soon a newspaper appears, then another. Printers recognize demand for information. Residents want updates about mining discoveries, political developments, business opportunities, and events elsewhere in the region. News becomes valuable. Reliable news becomes even more valuable. You step inside one printing office. Ink stains cover work tables. Sheets of paper are stacked everywhere. Editors work rapidly beneath flickering lamplight. The room smells of paper, oil, and effort. Information travels slowly compared to modern standards. Yet people crave it just as intensely. Outside, another sign of permanence emerges, a church. Soon after comes a school, then legal offices, then warehouses. Gradually, the settlement begins evolving beyond its original purpose. This pattern repeats throughout the West. Mining camps become towns. Towns become cities. Not all survive. Some vanish entirely. Others flourish for generations. Historians studying Western development often emphasize this remarkable speed of urban growth. Research associated with institutions such as Stanford University and the University of Chicago has explored how frontier settlements sometimes developed social and economic structures far more quickly than earlier communities in American history. Exactly how orderly this process was remains a matter of scholarly discussion. Historians still debate whether boomtown growth should be viewed primarily as chaotic improvisation or as a surprisingly effective form of rapid community building under difficult conditions. Evidence exists for both interpretations. The towns certainly appear chaotic. Yet many manage to create functioning institutions remarkably fast. Your evening walk continues along the main street. Lanterns glow through wooden windows. Laughter drifts from gathering places. Musicians perform simple tunes for paying audiences. Gamblers crowd around tables. The town is exhausted. The town is alive. These two realities coexist comfortably. You pause outside a boarding house. Travelers arrive carrying bedrolls and dusty clothing. Some have spent months crossing the continent. Others have come from distant countries. Each person carries a private story. Each person carries expectations. Some expectations will be fulfilled. Many will not. The frontier rarely behaves exactly as people imagine. That unpredictability becomes one of its defining characteristics. A physically grounded detail catches your attention. Fresh boards recently nailed onto a building still release the scent of pine resin. Nearby, mud bears the deep impressions of wagon wheels. Horses stand tethered beside water troughs after long days of work. The environment itself records every activity, every arrival, every departure, every ambition. Night settles gradually over the settlement. Stars appear above dark hills. Campfires flicker in hundreds of locations. Voices soften as fatigue spreads through the town. For a brief moment, calm arrives, yet even now, plans are forming. Tomorrow, someone will discover gold. Tomorrow, someone will lose money. Tomorrow, another wagon train will arrive. Tomorrow, another building will rise. The cycle continues. The settlement may seem temporary, but its influence is becoming permanent. These boomtowns are not merely places where gold seekers gather. They are the foundations of a new Western society. They represent the first rough sketches of communities that will shape the future of the American frontier. The Wild West is beginning to take form, not through famous gunfights, not through legends, through ordinary people building lives amid uncertainty, board by board, street by street, dream by dream. The town behind you continues growing, but your attention now turns toward the people whose labor fuels its existence. The miners. Every boomtown depends upon them. Every merchant watches them closely. Every rumor revolves around them. And every morning, long before sunrise, thousands wake with the same thought. Perhaps today will be the day. You step into a mining camp as dawn slowly brightens the eastern sky. The air feels cool against your skin. Smoke rises from dying campfires. Canvas tents stand silently beneath pale light. Somewhere nearby, a mule stamps its hoof against the ground. The camp is already stirring. Men emerge from tents wrapped in blankets. Some prepare coffee. Others check tools worn from months of use. Faces appear tired. Clothing shows signs of hard labor, yet determination remains visible almost everywhere. Gold has a remarkable ability to keep hope alive. Even after disappointment, even after exhaustion, even after failure, the day begins with routine. A miner gathers his shovel, pan, and pick. He eats a simple breakfast, perhaps beans, perhaps bread, perhaps little more than coffee. Then he walks toward a stream where countless others are already working. The water is cold, very cold, especially in the early morning. Your fingers ache just imagining it. Yet miners spend hours standing beside rivers, kneeling in mud, lifting heavy gravel, and searching patiently through sediment. The work demands strength, endurance, and persistence. Most importantly, it demands patience. Popular stories often suggest that fortune appears suddenly. Reality is usually less dramatic. A miner may spend an entire day finding almost nothing, then return the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Hope becomes part of the job. A strong sensory moment unfolds beside the riverbank. Water rushes over the stones polished smooth by centuries of movement. Wet earth clings to boots. Sunlight flashes across metal pans. The constant scraping of shovels creates a rhythm that echoes through the valley. The sounds rarely stop. The labor never feels glamorous, yet people continue arriving. You watch one miner carefully swirl water through a pan. He moves slowly, allowing lighter material to wash away. The process requires concentration. Tiny mistakes can mean missing valuable particles. Then a flash appears, just a few bright specks. Nothing enormous, yet enough to quicken the heart. Enough to make tomorrow seem worthwhile. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive archival evidence is that most gold rush miners never became wealthy. Historical studies consistently show that while a small number achieved significant success, many earned modest returns or failed to recover their expenses. The dream remains powerful. The odds remain difficult. Human beings have always been willing to gamble against probability when hope enters the equation. The camp itself reveals another side of frontier life. After work, miners return carrying dust-covered tools and tired bodies. They wash clothing when possible. They repair equipment. They cook simple meals. Comfort is limited, very limited. Canvas tents offer little protection against weather. Wooden shelters often remain crude. Privacy is rare. Cleanliness can be difficult to maintain. Yet communities emerge anyway. You enter one tent where several miners share living space. Blankets cover rough sleeping platforms. Supplies are stacked neatly against canvas walls. A lantern hangs from a wooden pole. The smell of coffee lingers in the air. Nothing here appears luxurious. Everything serves a purpose. An intimate human detail becomes visible during the evening meal. One miner carefully unfolds a letter from home. The paper is worn from repeated reading. He studies familiar handwriting by lantern light while conversations continue around him. For a few minutes, the frontier disappears. He is thinking about family, about home, about people far away. Letters become treasures in places like this. Sometimes they arrive months late. Sometimes they never arrive. When they do appear, they carry enormous emotional weight. The camp contains more diversity than many modern listeners might expect. People arrive from different regions, different countries, and different backgrounds. Former farmers work beside merchants. Sailors work beside craftsmen. Immigrants from distant lands search the same rivers as American-born miners. Everyone hopes for luck. Not everyone receives equal treatment. Competition can create tensions. Cultural differences sometimes lead to misunderstandings or discrimination. The gold rush opens opportunities, but it also reveals existing prejudices and creates new conflicts. Human nature remains complicated. The frontier does not erase that reality. As afternoon heat settles across the valley, the physical demands become even clearer. Muscles ache, shoulders burn, hands develop blisters. Boots wear out quickly, equipment breaks without warning. Mining is work, hard work, relentlessly physical work. Your mind drifts toward larger mining operations beginning to appear. Early prospectors often search streams individually or in small groups. Over time, however, more organized methods emerge. Companies invest money, equipment, and labor into larger projects. The nature of mining begins changing. Opportunity remains. Competition increases. Researchers associated with institutions such as Harvard University and the University of California have explored how this transition affected frontier society. Historians continue debating the extent to which large-scale mining gradually displaced independent prospectors or whether smaller operations remained more significant than traditionally assumed. The evidence varies by region and period. The debate remains active. What is clear is that mining camps evolve constantly. Nothing remains static for long. A reflective pause arrives as evening settles over the valley. The river that seemed full of promise at sunrise now reflects fading light beneath darkening skies. Miners walk slowly back toward camp. Their movements reveal exhaustion. Yet tomorrow they will return, most of them. Anyway, hope survives another day. You notice a physically grounded detail near the edge of camp. Rows of worn boots sit outside tents, drying after long hours beside stream. Nearby, tools lean against wooden crates. The metal surfaces bear scratches from countless impacts against stone and gravel. The objects tell stories. Stories of effort, stories of persistence, stories of ordinary people chasing extraordinary possibilities. Night gradually settles over the camp. Lanterns flicker in the darkness. Conversations drift through cool air. Someone laughs at a joke. Someone else quietly calculates expenses. Another miner studies a map, planning where to search tomorrow. The emotional atmosphere shifts gently. Excitement gives way to reflection. Reflection gives way to fatigue. Fatigue gives way to sleep. Above the camp, stars spread across the western sky. Below them, thousands of dreamers rest beside rivers and mountains. Most will never become legends. Most names will disappear from history. Yet their labor helps shape the frontier. Their hopes help build towns. Their persistence helps transform California. The Wild West often remembers famous outlaws, gunfighters, and lawmen. But before those legends dominate the story, there are miners, cold hands, heavy tools, long days, flickering lanterns, and countless individuals waking each morning convinced that fortune may be waiting just beyond the next bend in the river. The mining camps continue humming through the valleys, but something important is beginning to happen around them. People are staying. What started as temporary settlements for fortune seekers is slowly becoming something more permanent. The tents remain. The miners remain. Yet alongside them appear families, shopkeepers, teachers, clergy, lawyers, builders, and countless others who have no intention of spending their days searching riverbeds. They are building communities, and communities change everything. You walk through a frontier settlement in the early 1850s, only a few years earlier. This place barely existed. Now wooden storefronts line the main street. Wagons crowd the roads. Signs hang above businesses. New buildings seem to appear every week. The transformation feels almost magical. Yet it is the result of ordinary human effort, board by board, nail by nail, day by day. The morning begins with familiar sounds. Hammers strike lumber. Horses pull loaded wagons. Merchants unlock doors. Children hurry toward makeshift schools. Smoke rises from kitchen chimneys. For the first time, the town feels less like a camp and more like a place where people expect to remain. That distinction matters. A mining camp is designed for opportunity. A town is designed for life. You pause outside a general store near the center of the settlement. Barrels of flour stand beside stacks of tools. Shelves hold fabric, coffee, candles, cooking utensils, and household goods. Customers arrive steadily. Not all of them are miners. A woman purchases supplies for her family. A carpenter seeks materials for a new building. A farmer delivers produce. A hotel owner negotiates prices for food shipments. Economic life is becoming more diverse. Gold may have started the process. It no longer explains everything. One widely accepted historical fact is that many Western settlements quickly developed complex local economies extending far beyond mining. Historical records show that farming, transportation, trade, construction, and service industries became essential foundations of frontier growth. Gold attracts people. Communities keep them there. The emotional atmosphere of the town reflects this shift. Early mining camps often feel temporary and uncertain. Frontier towns begin developing routines. Residents start planning for the future rather than merely surviving the present. You notice a schoolhouse near the edge of town. The building is simple. The purpose is profound. Parents want education for their children. They want stability. They want opportunities extending beyond mining claims and prospecting equipment. The presence of schools reveals confidence. People do not build schools if they expect to leave next month. Your attention shifts toward a newspaper office. The building is modest, but activity inside remains constant. Editors gather information from travelers, merchants, government officials, and local residents. News matters more than ever. A growing community requires communication. The newspaper reports business developments. It announces social events. It discusses politics. It sometimes criticizes local leaders. In short, it behaves like a newspaper almost anywhere else. The frontier is becoming less isolated. A strong sensory moment unfolds as you enter the printing office. The smell of fresh ink fills the room. Metal type rests on crowded work tables. Sheets of paper rustle softly beneath busy hands. Oil lamps cast warm light across stacks of unfinished pages. The atmosphere feels energetic, focused, purposeful. Outside, construction continues everywhere. New hotels rise along the main street. Warehouses appear near transportation routes. Blacksmith shops expand operations. Boarding houses struggle to accommodate growing populations. The town is growing faster than anyone expected, perhaps faster than it should. Yet growth continues regardless. You encounter an intimate human scene during the afternoon. A family stands outside a newly completed home. The structure is not large. The boards are still fresh. The windows remain simple. Yet pride shines across their faces. This house represents permanence. It represents belonging. It represents a future. Such moments rarely dominate popular Wild West stories, but they are everywhere in historical records. Behind the dramatic legends stand countless ordinary families building ordinary lives. Those lives matter deeply. The town also requires rules. Growth creates challenges. Property disputes emerge. Business disagreements occur. Crimes happen. Questions arise regarding roads, taxes, public services, and community responsibilities. Governance becomes necessary. You step inside a meeting hall where local leaders discuss such matters. The room smells faintly of wood smoke and paper. Voices rise and fall as residents debate solutions. The conversations can be tedious. They are also essential. Frontier communities survive because people organize themselves. Not perfectly, not always peacefully, but consistently enough to create functioning societies. Researchers associated with institutions such as Yale University and Princeton University have examined how Western towns developed political and civic structures during periods of rapid growth. Historians continue debating whether frontier governance emerged primarily through formal institutions or through informal community cooperation before official systems became fully established. Both forces appear important. Formal rules matter. Informal relationships matter too. The town depends upon both. As evening approaches, businesses begin closing for the day. Shopkeepers count receipts. Workers return home. Families gather for meals. Children play in dusty streets before being called indoors. The rhythms feel familiar, remarkably familiar. In many ways, frontier towns become recognizable communities far more quickly than outsiders might expect. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a newly built church. Fresh sawdust still covers portions of the ground. Nearby, wagon tracks cut deep grooves into soft earth. Construction materials remain stacked beside unfinished structures. The town is still being built everywhere you look. Evidence of growth remains visible. Nothing feels complete, yet nothing feels temporary anymore. The emotional tone shifts gently as darkness approaches. Earlier sections of the frontier story often revolve around uncertainty and risk. Now a different feeling begins emerging. Attachment. People are forming connections to places. They are investing time, labor, and emotion into communities they hope will endure. That hope changes behavior. It encourages cooperation. It encourages responsibility. It encourages long-term thinking. Night settles gradually across the settlement. Lanterns glow behind windows. Conversations drift from homes and boarding houses. Somewhere a piano plays a simple melody. The notes float softly through cool evening air. The town feels alive, not because of gold, because of people. Gold may have drawn them west. Community gives them reasons to stay. You pause in the center of the main street and look around. Storefronts stand where empty land recently existed. Schools educate children, churches gather congregations, newspapers circulate information, families create homes. A society is emerging, not a perfect society, not a peaceful society, but a functioning one. The Wild West is often remembered through dramatic moments. Gunfights, outlaws, treasure, adventure. Yet the deeper story frequently unfolds through quieter achievements. A house completed, a school opened, a business established, a family settled, a community formed. Those achievements rarely become legends. They become foundations. And on those foundations, the next chapter of Western history will continue to rise. The towns continue expanding behind you, their streets filling with merchants, families, and builders. Yet beyond those growing communities stretches another world entirely, a world of open grasslands, a world of immense distances, a world where the horizon seems to move farther away the longer you ride toward it. This is the world of the cowboy, not the mythical figure of later novels and film. The real one. The working cowboy, the man whose daily life revolves around cattle, weather, horses, and endless miles of prairie. You find yourself standing on the Great Plains during the years after the Civil War. The morning air feels cool and fresh. Dew clings to tall grass in the distance. Cattle move slowly across the landscape like a living river. The scene feels peaceful, for now, because work begins early, very early. A cowboy rises before sunrise. He sleeps lightly, often wrapped in blankets beneath the open sky or in a simple camp. His clothing is practical rather than fashionable. Every item serves a purpose. Boots protect his feet. A hat shields him from sun and rain. A bandana guards against dust. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is decorative without reason. You hear horses breathing quietly in the half-light. Saddles creak as riders prepare for another long day. Leather smells rich and worn. The scent of grass mixes with wood smoke from a nearby campfire. The sensory details are subtle, yet unforgettable. This landscape shapes everyone who lives within it. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive historical records, is that the cattle industry expanded dramatically after the Civil War. Millions of cattle roamed Texas and surrounding regions, creating enormous demand for skilled riders capable of managing herds across vast distances. The demand creates opportunity, and opportunity attracts workers. Many modern people imagine cowboys as solitary figures constantly involved in gunfights. Reality is usually less dramatic. Most cowboys spend their time performing difficult physical labor. They herd cattle. They repair fences. They monitor water sources. They care for horses. They solve practical problems every day. The work can be exhausting. You ride with a group moving cattle across open range. The herd stretches across the prairie. Dust rises beneath thousands of hooves. The sound resembles distant thunder. Hour after hour, the riders remain alert. A sudden disturbance can create chaos. A frightened animal can affect hundreds more. Attention matters. Experience matters. Calmness matters. The emotional atmosphere among the riders feels different from mining camps. Prospectors often chase individual fortunes. Cowboys depend heavily upon teamwork. One person's mistake can create difficulties for everyone. Trust becomes essential. A strong sensory moment arrives during the heat of afternoon. Sunlight presses heavily upon the plains. Sweat dampens clothing. Horses move steadily through tall grass. Dust settles across faces and equipment. The heat feels endless. The sky feels enormous. The land seems to stretch forever. You begin understanding why the West leaves such a powerful impression upon those who experience it. Scale changes perspective. Human concerns appear smaller beneath such vast horizons. Yet daily life remains intensely practical. A cowboy must know how to ride effectively. He must understand animal behavior. He must handle difficult weather. He must remain adaptable when conditions change unexpectedly, and conditions always change. Storms arrive without invitation. Rivers rise suddenly. Drought transforms familiar landscapes. The environment demands respect. An intimate human detail emerges during an evening rest. One rider carefully removes a photograph from his belongings. The image shows family members living hundreds of miles away. For several minutes, he studies the picture silently before returning it to safety. The gesture feels simple. The meaning runs deeper. Many cowboys live highly mobile lives. Separation from family can last months. Letters arrive irregularly. Familiar faces remain distant memories. The open range offers freedom. It also offers loneliness. Both realities coexist as darkness approaches. The herd settles gradually. Campfires appear across the prairie. Riders gather for meals after long hours in the saddle. Coffee brews slowly. Conversation drifts through cool evening air. The mood softens. Fatigue replaces urgency. The stars begin appearing overhead. Countless stars, far more than most town dwellers ever see. You notice how often nature dictates the rhythm of life. Modern schedules matter little here. Weather determines priorities. Animal behavior influences plans. Seasonal changes shape entire industries. The prairie follows its own logic. Human beings adapt accordingly. Researchers associated with institutions such as the University of Chicago and Stanford University have explored how cattle ranching helped transform Western economies during the late 19th century. Historians continue debating the extent to which the cowboy later became a national symbol because of actual economic importance, or because popular culture elevated the profession into something larger than life. The debate remains interesting. The reality remains impressive, regardless of later mythology. Cattle work required remarkable skill. You ride again the following morning. The grasslands glow beneath early sunlight. Birds rise from hidden nests. Cool air moves gently across open country. For a moment, everything feels calm. Then a calf wanders away from the herd. Immediately, riders respond. The situation is minor. The response is professional. Small problems become large problems when ignored. This principle guides much of frontier life. The physically grounded details continue accumulating. Worn saddle leather bears marks from years of use. Horses carry traces of dried sweat after long rides. Boots collect dust that seems impossible to remove completely. The equipment tells stories. Stories of work. Stories of endurance. Stories of adaptation. The emotional transition becomes noticeable as you spend more time among the riders. At first, the prairie seems empty. Gradually, it feels full of meaning. Every hill influences movement. Every stream matters. Every weather change commands attention. Knowledge transforms the landscape. Experience transforms perception. The West rewards those who learn its patterns. Night returns once more. The cattle rest quietly. Campfires flicker against darkness. Riders speak softly after another demanding day. There is no dramatic gunfight, no legendary showdown, no famous outlaw. Only working people performing difficult tasks beneath enormous skies. And yet this ordinary reality helps create one of the most enduring symbols in American history. The cowboy emerges not from fantasy, but from labor, from long rides, from dust and weather, from responsibility, from countless days spent caring for animals across vast landscapes. Later generations will transform that figure into legend. For now, however, the cowboy remains what he has always been, a worker on the frontier, a rider on the plains, a participant in a rapidly changing West where towns continue growing, railroads continue advancing, and the open range still stretches toward distant horizons. The open range stretches endlessly around you, but cattle do not move themselves to market. The great herds grazing across Texas and neighboring regions must somehow reach buyers hundreds of miles away. Growing cities demand beef. Railroads need livestock delivered to their depots. Investors expect profits. Ranch owners seek new opportunities. Between the cattle and the markets lies a vast challenge. Distance. A great deal of distance. This challenge gives rise to one of the most famous features of the Wild West, the cattle trail. You find yourself standing beside a herd preparing for a long drive northward during the late 1860s and early 1870s. The morning sky glows softly above the prairie. Horses wait patiently. Saddles are secured. Supplies are loaded. Everyone understands what lies ahead. Weeks of travel, perhaps months. The journey will demand patience, endurance, and skill. The cattle seem calm now. That will not always be the case. A trail drive begins with organization. Each rider has responsibilities. The trail boss oversees decisions. Experienced cowboys manage different sections of the herd. Cooks handle food and supplies. Everyone contributes. Teamwork is not optional. It is essential. The herd begins moving. Thousands of hooves press into the earth. Dust rises gradually into the air. The sound builds into a steady rhythm that accompanies the travelers throughout the day. The movement feels almost hypnotic. Slow, constant, relentless, hour after hour. The cattle advance across grasslands, river valleys, and open country. The pace remains deliberate because rushing creates problems. Animals tire. Order breaks down. Accidents become more likely. The trail rewards patience. You ride alongside the herd as the sun climbs higher. Heat spreads across the plains. Insects drift through the air. Riders remain watchful for signs of trouble. The work requires concentration. Even routine moments demand attention. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive historical evidence is that major cattle trails, such as the Chisholm Trail, helped connect Texas ranching operations to expanding railroad networks farther north. These routes became critical economic corridors during the post-Civil War decades. The impact extends far beyond ranches. Entire communities benefit. Railroad towns grow. Merchants profit. Investors celebrate. The cattle industry becomes increasingly connected to national markets. Yet, from the perspective of the riders, daily concerns remain practical. Where is the next water source? Will the weather hold? Can the herd cross the river safely? Such questions matter more than economic theory. A strong sensory moment unfolds near a river crossing. The water moves swiftly between muddy banks. Cattle hesitate at the edge. Riders guide them forward carefully. Hooves splash. Mud churns beneath thousands of feet. Voices echo above the noise of moving animals. For several tense minutes. Confusion threatens. Then the crossing succeeds. Relief spreads visibly through the group. A simple river can become a major obstacle on the frontier. You continue northward. Days become weeks. The routine settles into familiar patterns. Wake before sunrise. Move the herd. Monitor conditions. Rest briefly. Resume travel. Establish camp. Sleep. Repeat. The repetition might sound monotonous. It rarely feels that way. Every day brings new challenges. Weather remains unpredictable. One afternoon, dark clouds gather rapidly across the horizon. Wind strengthens. Grass bends beneath powerful gusts. Riders exchange concerned glances. Storms can create serious danger, especially when cattle become frightened. Thunder rolls across the plains. Lightning flashes in the distance. Rain begins. The herd grows restless. Cowboys move carefully, attempting to maintain order. Experience teaches them that panic can spread quickly among large groups of animals. The atmosphere becomes tense. Yet the riders remain focused. Their calmness influences the herd. Their skill becomes visible. Historical accounts frequently describe how experienced cowboys developed remarkable abilities to manage difficult situations. Years spent working with livestock taught lessons unavailable in books or classrooms. Knowledge comes from practice, from mistakes, from survival. An intimate human detail appears one evening after the storm passes. A young cowboy sits quietly beside the fire, repairing worn equipment. The task is small, a torn strap, a damaged buckle. Yet he works carefully. Every piece of equipment matters during a long drive. Replacement supplies may be far away. Resourcefulness becomes a valuable frontier skill. The camp itself feels surprisingly orderly. A cook prepares meals from simple ingredients. Riders discuss the day's events. Horses rest nearby after hours of labor. The smell of coffee drifts through cool night air. Fatigue is everywhere. So is satisfaction. Progress may be slow, but the herd continues moving toward its destination. The emotional transition becomes noticeable as the drive advances. Early excitement gradually gives way to professionalism. The journey stops feeling like an adventure and starts feeling like work. Important work, demanding work, but work nonetheless. This distinction often disappears in later legends. Reality tends to be more practical. Researchers associated with institutions such as Yale University and the University of Texas have examined the economic and cultural significance of cattle drives. Historians continue debating how representative these famous drives were of everyday Western life. Since popular memory often emphasizes dramatic trail experiences while overlooking other important frontier occupations, the discussion remains active. The cattle drives remain iconic. Both observations can be true simultaneously. A physically grounded detail catches your attention during another long afternoon. The leather reins feel worn smooth from constant use. Dust settles into every fold of clothing. Horses carry traces of dried mud from previous crossings. Nothing remains pristine for long. The trail leaves its mark on everyone. Eventually, the landscape begins changing. Signs of settlement appear more frequently. Roads become more defined. Railroad facilities emerge on distant horizons. The destination approaches. The herd senses change. So do the riders. Weeks of effort are nearing completion. When the cattle finally reach market, the achievement feels significant. Buyers inspect livestock. Negotiations begin. Workers unload supplies. Riders experience the strange feeling of stopping after weeks of constant movement. The silence feels unusual, almost unsettling. The drive is over. Another will begin eventually, but not today. You pause and reflect upon what these journeys represent. They are more than transportation projects. They are connections between regions. They help integrate the growing West into larger economic systems. They also reveal the realities behind Western expansion: long distances, hard labor, careful organization, persistent effort. The Wild West often celebrates moments of excitement. Yet the cattle trails demonstrate something equally important: endurance. Thousands of miles, countless hoofbeats, endless horizons, and generations of riders guiding immense herds across a continent that still feels vast enough to swallow entire dreams. The cattle trails continue carrying herds across the plains. But another force is advancing across the West. Unlike cattle, it never stops to graze. Unlike wagon trains, it moves with growing speed. Unlike rivers, it follows routes chosen by human hands. The railroad is coming, and with it comes one of the greatest transformations in the history of the American frontier. You stand on an open stretch of prairie during the 1860s. The grass ripples beneath a steady wind. In the distance, workers move methodically across the landscape. Wagons carry supplies. Teams of laborers lift heavy rails. Hammers ring out with rhythmic precision. The sound carries far. Metal, striking metal, again and again and again. A railroad may appear simple when viewed on a map, a line connecting one place to another. In reality, building that line requires enormous effort. Every mile demands labor. Every bridge demands planning. Every rail demands transportation. The project unfolds across mountains, deserts, plains, and river valleys. Nothing about it is easy. You walk among the workers as construction progresses westward. The air smells of fresh timber and hot iron. Wooden ties lie stacked beside unfinished track. Dust rises beneath wagon wheels, carrying equipment toward the advancing line. The pace feels relentless, because it is. Railroad companies understand the stakes. Whoever completes the route first gains enormous advantages. Investors watch closely. Government officials pay attention. Newspapers report progress eagerly. The nation seems focused on the same goal: connecting East and West. One widely accepted historical fact is that the completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 dramatically reduced travel times across the continent. Journeys that once required months could now be completed in a matter of days. The significance is difficult to overstate. The continent suddenly feels smaller, not physically, economically, socially, politically. The railroad changes how people experience distance itself. Before the rails, a journey west demands tremendous commitment. Travelers spend months crossing difficult terrain. Communication remains slow. Transportation costs remain high. After the rails, possibilities expand dramatically. Merchants can move goods faster. Families can travel more easily. Information circulates more quickly. Entire communities gain new opportunities. You watch a train approach across the plains. At first, it appears as little more than a dark shape on the horizon. Then comes the sound, a distant rumble, growing steadily louder. Steam rises into the sky. Wheels thunder against iron rails. The locomotive moves with a confidence that seems almost astonishing compared to the slower transportation methods that dominated earlier decades. People stop and watch. Many never lose that habit. The railroad possesses a certain presence, a sense of power. A strong sensory moment unfolds as the train passes nearby. Steam hisses loudly into open air. Iron wheels strike the rails with rhythmic force. Smoke drifts across the prairie, carrying the scent of coal and machinery. The sound fills the landscape, then gradually fades, leaving silence behind. The emotional reaction among frontier residents varies. Some welcome the railroad enthusiastically. They see prosperity, growth, and opportunity. Others view it with caution. Rapid change rarely benefits everyone equally. The railroad creates winners. It also creates losers. Towns located near rail lines often prosper. Communities bypassed by construction sometimes struggle. Economic patterns shift rapidly. Fortunes change. The West changes with them. An intimate human detail emerges at a small railroad station. A woman waits anxiously beside the platform. She has not seen a relative in years. Before the railroad, such reunions would be rare and difficult. Now the possibility exists. The train arrives. Passengers step onto the platform. Families embrace. The moment feels deeply personal, yet it reflects a larger transformation. The railroad does not merely move goods. It moves people, relationships, ideas, dreams. You continue westward along the expanding network. New stations appear across regions that recently seemed isolated. Businesses develop around transportation hubs. Warehouses fill with products arriving from distant states. The frontier becomes increasingly connected to national markets. Local economies change accordingly. Farmers can ship crops farther than before. Ranchers gain easier access to buyers. Merchants receive supplies more reliably. The benefits accumulate, so do the consequences. The environmental impact becomes noticeable. Forests provide timber for construction. Landscapes are altered to accommodate tracks. Wildlife patterns change. Human activity expands into previously remote areas. Progress carries costs. History often involves such trade-offs. Researchers associated with institutions such as Stanford University and Harvard University have examined the railroad's role in accelerating Western development. Historians continue debating whether railroads primarily responded to existing settlement patterns or actively created new patterns by directing migration, investment, and economic activity. The answer appears complex. The railroad both follows development and encourages more of it. Cause and effect become intertwined. You notice how quickly perceptions change. Areas once considered distant frontiers begin appearing more accessible. Investors who might never travel west become willing to fund Western enterprises. Families consider relocation with greater confidence. The psychological impact is enormous. Distance feels different when trains can cross it. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a maintenance yard. Workers inspect bolts, wheels, and rails with careful attention. Iron components show signs of wear from constant use. Tools lie organized beside stacks of replacement materials. The railroad requires continuous upkeep. Building it is only the beginning. Keeping it operational demands ongoing effort. Night settles across a small railroad town. Lanterns glow near the station. Travelers wait for scheduled arrivals. Freight sits ready for transport. The tracks stretch into darkness beyond the edge of town. The scene feels strangely modern, orderly, connected, purposeful, yet the surrounding landscape remains unmistakably Western. Vast open spaces still dominate the horizon. The frontier has not disappeared. It is evolving. The emotional transition becomes clear. Earlier generations viewed the West as remote and difficult to reach. Increasingly, it becomes a destination connected to broader national systems. The sense of isolation begins fading. Not everywhere, not immediately, but steadily. You stand beside the tracks as another train disappears into the distance. Its lights grow smaller. Its sound gradually fades into the night. The railroad has arrived, and nothing will be quite the same afterward. Cowboys still ride the plains. Miners still search streams. Frontier towns still grow. But now iron rails bind these worlds together. The Wild West remains rugged and unpredictable, yet it is becoming connected, linked by steel, powered by steam, drawn into a future moving faster than anyone standing beside those early rivers of gold could have imagined. The railroad stretches across the West now, carrying passengers, freight, news, and opportunity. Towns continue expanding, businesses multiply, populations grow, and wherever people gather in large numbers. Another challenge inevitably appears. How do you maintain order? The question sounds simple. The answer rarely is. You arrive in a frontier town during the 1870s. The main street is busy from sunrise until well after dark. Wagons roll through deep ruts. Merchants call to customers. Horses crowd hitching posts outside stores and hotels. The settlement feels prosperous. It also feels fragile. Growth brings opportunity. Growth also brings conflict. Property disputes emerge. Drunken arguments occur. Theft occasionally appears. Business disagreements become personal. The more people arrive, the more complicated community life becomes. Someone must manage these problems. Someone must enforce the rules. This is where lawmen enter the story, not as flawless heroes, not as larger-than-life legends, but as ordinary people attempting a difficult job. You step inside a sheriff's office near the center of town. The room is modest. Wooden furniture occupies most of the space. Papers cover a desk. A stove provides warmth during colder months. The air carries a faint scent of ink, dust, and wood smoke. Nothing about the office appears glamorous, yet important decisions are made here. The sheriff begins his day much like any other working professional. He reviews complaints. He speaks with residents. He investigates disputes. He responds to problems as they arise. Most frontier law enforcement involves routine matters, not dramatic gunfights. Routine matters rarely become famous. They are still essential. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive historical records, is that many Western towns developed surprisingly formal legal institutions during periods of rapid growth. Sheriffs, marshals, judges, juries, and local governments often played significant roles in maintaining daily order. The reality is more organized than popular mythology sometimes suggests. That does not mean life is peaceful. Far from it. The frontier presents unique challenges. Communities grow faster than institutions can always keep pace. Distances remain vast. Communication can be slow. Resources are limited. Lawmen frequently operate under difficult conditions. You accompany a town marshal making rounds through the business district. The afternoon sun reflects off windows and wagon wheels. Merchants sweep sidewalks. Customers move between stores carrying supplies and purchases. Most interactions appear ordinary. That is a good sign. Successful law enforcement often means nothing dramatic happens. The marshal understands this. His goal is stability, not excitement. A strong sensory moment unfolds as a summer storm approaches. Wind pushes dust through the streets. Signs creak overhead. Thunder rumbles beyond distant hills. Residents hurry indoors while horses shift nervously beside hitching rails. For a few minutes, the town feels tense. Then the rain arrives. Heavy, cooling, refreshing. Mud quickly replaces dust. The storm passes. Life resumes. The marshal continues walking. The work never truly stops. An intimate human detail emerges later that evening. A local lawman sits alone at his desk, reading a letter from home. His responsibilities often keep him busy. The town depends upon him. Yet he remains a husband, a father, a son, or a friend before anything else. The badge does not erase humanity. Historical records reveal this repeatedly. Many frontier lawmen lived ordinary lives outside their professional duties. They worried about finances. They maintained families. They struggled with personal challenges. The legends simplify them. Reality makes them more interesting. You attend a local court session the following day. Residents gather to observe proceedings. Witnesses provide testimony. Lawyers present arguments. A judge listens carefully before issuing decisions. The process feels familiar, because it is. The frontier does not exist outside the legal traditions developing throughout the nation. Communities seek fairness, consistency, and accountability even when conditions remain difficult. Not every case proceeds smoothly. Not every verdict satisfies everyone. Yet the effort itself matters. The existence of functioning legal systems encourages confidence. People are more willing to invest, settle, and build communities when they believe disputes can be resolved peacefully. The emotional atmosphere of the town reflects this gradual stabilization. Earlier boomtowns often feel uncertain as institutions mature. Residents begin developing stronger expectations regarding public order. Predictability becomes valuable, very valuable. Businesses appreciate it. Families appreciate it. Investors appreciate it. Researchers associated with institutions such as Yale University and the University of Chicago have examined the relationship between legal institutions and frontier development. Historians continue debating whether Western communities were generally more lawless than popular memory suggests, or whether later storytelling exaggerated disorder while overlooking everyday stability. The debate remains lively. The evidence is nuanced. Some places experience significant violence, others remain relatively peaceful. The West is too large and diverse for simple conclusions. You notice how newspapers contribute to law enforcement efforts. Reports of crimes circulate quickly. Public discussions influence community expectations. Information spreads through print far more effectively than in earlier decades. The growing communication network strengthens institutions. Knowledge becomes a tool. So does reputation. A physically grounded detail catches your attention outside the jail. Wagon tracks cut through wet mud left by recent rain. Iron bars cover small windows. Nearby residents continue daily activities without paying much attention to the building. Its presence has become normal, part of the community. Not every resident loves authority. Not every lawman earns universal respect. Yet most people recognize the necessity of some form of order. Without it, growth becomes difficult. Night settles over the town once again. Lanterns glow through storefront windows. Conversations drift from restaurants and boarding houses. Horses stand quietly beneath dark skies. The marshal continues his rounds. The sheriff reviews paperwork. The judge prepares for another day's hearings. None of them know whether future generations will remember their names. Most will not be remembered. That is perfectly fine. The frontier depends upon countless individuals performing necessary tasks without expectation of fame. The emotional transition becomes clear as you walk through the quiet streets. Earlier sections of the Wild West story focus on opportunity, migration, and expansion. Increasingly, another theme emerges: structure. Communities are learning how to govern themselves. Not perfectly, not uniformly, but steadily. The Wild West often celebrates outlaws. Yet before outlaws can become famous, there must be laws. Before there can be legends of pursuit, there must be people willing to enforce rules. The lawmen represent that effort, an ongoing attempt to bring stability to rapidly changing communities. A difficult task, a necessary task, and one that helps shape the future of the frontier just as surely as gold discoveries, cattle trails, or railroad tracks ever did. The frontier towns continue growing. Railroads connect distant regions. Lawmen patrol busy streets. Families establish homes. Businesses prosper. Yet alongside these developments, another kind of figure captures public attention: the outlaw. Not because outlaws are common, because they are memorable. Human beings have always been fascinated by those who live outside accepted rules. The Wild West becomes no exception. Newspapers publish dramatic stories. Rumors spread quickly. Tales grow larger with each retelling. Before long, certain names begin acquiring legendary status. Reality and myth start blending together. You arrive in a frontier town on a warm evening during the late 19th century. The streets remain busy despite the fading sunlight. Residents gather outside businesses discussing recent events. Somewhere nearby, a newspaper editor prepares tomorrow's edition. A story is circulating. An outlaw has reportedly been seen in the region. Perhaps the report is accurate. Perhaps it is not. Either way, people are talking. The emotional reaction is revealing. Some residents feel concerned. Others seem excited. Many are simply curious. The possibility of encountering a famous outlaw transforms an ordinary day into something more dramatic. Stories possess power, especially on the frontier. You step inside a newspaper office where editors sort through reports arriving from neighboring communities. Letters, telegrams, and witness accounts cover their desks. Some information appears reliable, some does not. Determining the difference can be difficult. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive archival records is that newspapers played a major role in shaping public perceptions of Western outlaws. Media coverage often transformed local incidents into regional or national stories, helping create enduring legends. The process begins here, with words on paper, with editors making choices, with readers eager for excitement. A strong sensory moment unfolds inside the printing room. Metal type clicks softly against wooden trays. Fresh ink fills the air. Oil lamps cast warm light across stacks of unfinished pages. Outside, distant wagon wheels echo through darkening streets. The atmosphere feels focused, almost theatrical. History is being recorded, and occasionally embellished. You begin noticing how rapidly stories evolve. A robbery becomes more daring with each retelling. An escape becomes more miraculous. A confrontation becomes more dramatic. The facts remain important. The storytelling becomes irresistible. This does not mean every famous outlaw is fictional. Far from it. Some individuals genuinely commit crimes that attract widespread attention. Bank robberies occur. Train robberies occur. Livestock theft occurs. Violence sometimes accompanies these activities. The crimes are real. The legends grow larger. An intimate human detail emerges when you speak with local residents discussing a notorious outlaw. Many have never actually seen the person in question, yet they speak as though describing a familiar acquaintance. This is how legends often develop. Familiarity without direct experience. Confidence without complete information. Stories filling gaps where facts remain uncertain. You accompany a group of travelers crossing open country around the evening campfire. Conversation naturally turns toward famous criminals. Each participant contributes something: a rumor, a newspaper article, a second-hand account. By the end of the discussion, no one can fully separate truth from speculation. The process feels surprisingly modern. Human beings still behave this way. The frontier simply provides different subjects. The reality of outlaw life often proves less glamorous than later portrayals suggest. Constant movement creates stress. Reliable income remains uncertain. Pursuit by authorities can become exhausting. Trust is difficult when betrayal offers rewards. Life outside the law carries risks, substantial risks. Yet, popular imagination tends to focus on adventure rather than consequences. The contrast is fascinating. Researchers associated with institutions such as Harvard University and Stanford University have examined how Western outlaws became cultural symbols. Historians continue debating the extent to which famous figures were products of their actual actions versus products of media attention and later storytelling. The discussion remains active. The distinction matters, because memory and history are not always identical. You notice another important reality. Many frontier communities spend far more time discussing outlaws than actually encountering them. Most residents focus on work, family, business, and daily responsibilities. Ordinary life dominates. Extraordinary stories attract attention. The two coexist comfortably. A physically grounded detail catches your attention in a hotel lobby where travelers exchange news. Muddy boots rest near the entrance. Newspapers lie folded across tables. Rain taps gently against windows. The room smells faintly of coffee and wet wool. Every conversation seems to include at least one rumor. Some prove accurate. Many do not. The atmosphere remains lively regardless. The emotional transition becomes noticeable as evening deepens. Initial excitement gradually gives way to reflection. Residents discuss not only crimes, but also the reasons such stories fascinate them. Perhaps outlaws represent freedom. Perhaps they represent rebellion. Perhaps they simply make compelling characters. Different people draw different conclusions. The frontier provides fertile ground for imagination. Night settles fully across the town. Lanterns glow behind windows. Horses stand quietly in dark streets. The newspaper editor finishes another edition containing reports that readers will eagerly consume tomorrow morning. Some articles describe real events. Some contain misunderstandings. Some blend fact and speculation. Together, they help shape public memory. You pause outside the printing office and consider how legends are born. Rarely, all at once, usually through accumulation. A story here, a rumor there, a dramatic headline, a vivid recollection. Over time, these fragments merge into something larger. The Wild West becomes especially vulnerable to this process because so much change occurs so quickly. Distances remain vast. Information arrives unevenly. Witnesses disagree. No clear agreement survives in some cases. Accounts differ. Human memory proves imperfect. yet the stories endure. That endurance becomes part of the frontier's identity. The emotional atmosphere feels almost dreamlike now. Real people walk these streets. Real businesses operate. Real families live ordinary lives. Yet surrounding them grows a layer of mythology. The legends of outlaws. The legends of daring escapes. The legends of frontier adventure. Some contain substantial truth. Others contain more imagination than evidence. Most contain a mixture of both. And as the 19th century continues, those legends will become increasingly powerful. Not because they always reflect reality, because they capture attention, because they spark curiosity, because they transform local events into stories that future generations will remember long after the dust of the frontier has settled. The stories of outlaws continue circulating through newspapers and campfire conversations. But most people in the West spend very little time chasing criminals or escaping from them. They spend their time living. And nowhere is that everyday life more visible than along the main streets of frontier towns. You arrive in a thriving Western settlement during the early 1880s. The town has grown considerably since its rough beginnings. Wooden storefronts line both sides of the street. Wagons arrive steadily throughout the day. Horses crowd the hitching rails. Signs advertise businesses offering everything from boots and tools to meals and lodging. The atmosphere feels energetic, confident, busy. This is no longer a temporary mining camp. It is a functioning town. The heart of that town beats along its main street. You begin your walk shortly after sunrise. Merchants unlock doors and sweep sidewalks. Delivery wagons unload supplies. Bakers prepare fresh bread. Hotel staff arrange rooms for arriving guests. Everywhere you look, people are working. The Wild West often appears dramatic in popular imagination, but much of its history unfolds through routine economic activity. Towns survive because residents buy, sell, repair, transport, cook, build, and organize. The ordinary creates the extraordinary. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive historical research is that Western towns rapidly developed commercial districts containing hotels, restaurants, banks, newspapers, retail stores, and professional services. These businesses helped transform frontier settlements into stable communities. Economic life drives growth. Growth attracts more people. The cycle continues. You stop outside a hotel near the center of town. Stagecoaches arrive carrying travelers covered in dust from long journeys. Railroad passengers check into room after crossing vast distances. Salesmen, ranchers, lawyers, investors, and families all pass through the same lobby. The hotel serves as more than lodging. It functions as a social center. Information flows through places like this. Business deals begin here. Friendships form here. Rumors spread here. The lobby smells faintly of coffee, leather, and polished wood. Voices overlap as guests discuss weather, prices, politics, and transportation schedules. The conversation never truly stops. A strong sensory moment unfolds as you enter a restaurant during the busy midday hours. Plates clatter softly. Steam rises from hot meals. Fresh bread fills the room with a comforting aroma. Travelers remove dusty hats while servers move quickly between tables. The scene feels welcoming, especially after long days of travel. Good food becomes a treasured luxury on the frontier. You notice an intimate human detail near one corner table. A rancher sits quietly reading a letter while eating lunch. His expression changes gradually as he moves through the page. A smile appears, then reflection, then quiet satisfaction. The moment lasts only seconds, yet it reminds you that beneath the larger story of Western expansion lie countless private lives filled with hopes, worries, relationships, and memories. Those stories rarely appear in history books. They still matter as afternoon progresses. You continue along the main street. A bank stands beside a mercantile store. Nearby, a barber serves customers while discussing local news. Children run errands for parents. Business owners greet familiar faces. The town possesses a growing sense of permanence. People know one another. Reputations matter. Community identity strengthens. You eventually reach one of the most famous institutions of the Western frontier, the saloon. Popular culture often treats saloons as symbols of constant danger and excitement. Reality proves more varied. Many serve as gathering places where residents relax, socialize, conduct business, and exchange information. Some are respectable, some are not. Most fall somewhere in between. You step inside during the late afternoon. Sunlight filters through windows onto wooden floors, worn smooth by years of use. Conversations fill the room. A piano plays quietly in the background. The atmosphere feels surprisingly ordinary. A few men discuss cattle prices. Others debate local politics. Travelers exchange information about road conditions and railroad schedules. Business and entertainment coexist comfortably. This surprises many modern observers. The saloon often functions as a community center as much as a drinking establishment. Researchers associated with institutions such as Yale University and the University of California have examined the social role of Western gathering places. Historians continue debating the extent to which saloons should be viewed primarily as centers of vice or as important institutions supporting community interaction and economic networking. The evidence suggests both roles existed. Different towns developed different cultures. The West resists simple generalizations. Outside, the main street remains active. Freight wagons continue arriving. Storekeepers negotiate prices. Visitors browse merchandise imported from distant cities. The frontier is becoming increasingly connected to national and international markets. Products that once seemed impossible to obtain now appear on local shelves. Fashion changes. Consumer habits change. Expectations change. The West evolves rapidly. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near the edge of town. Telegraph wires stretch above the road, linking communities through new communication networks. Wooden poles cast long shadows across dusty ground. Nearby workers unload crates marked with destinations hundreds of miles away. Distance continues shrinking. The railroad helped begin the process. Technology accelerates it. Evening gradually settles over the settlement. Lamps appear behind shop windows. Restaurants prepare dinner service. Hotel guests return from business meetings and travel. The town takes on a warmer character after sunset. Less hurried, more reflective. Families gather for meals. Friends meet for conversation. Musicians perform for local audiences. The pace slows without stopping entirely. The emotional transition feels gentle. Earlier sections of the Wild West story emphasize movement, uncertainty, and risk. Here you encounter something different. Belonging. People are no longer merely passing through. Many have found homes. They have businesses, neighbors, responsibilities, communities. Night deepens. The main street glows beneath lantern light. Footsteps echo softly across wooden sidewalks. The distant sound of a train whistle drifts through cool air. For a moment, everything feels settled. Not perfect, not free from challenges, but settled. The Wild West is often remembered through its most dramatic moments. Yet the deeper reality includes evenings like this one. Busy streets, crowded hotels, familiar conversations, shared meals. The everyday experiences that transform settlements into towns and towns into lasting communities. These places may have begun as frontier outposts. Now they are becoming something more. Centers of commerce, centers of culture, centers of human connection. And their story is only continuing to grow. The hotel windows glow warmly behind you. The restaurants remain busy. Merchants finish their accounts for the day. Musicians play softly in distant gathering places. Yet as the town settles into evening, your attention shifts toward a quieter side of the frontier. The families, the households, the ordinary people whose names rarely appear in headlines, but whose lives shape the West just as profoundly as railroad builders. Miners, cowboys, or lawmen. History often remembers dramatic events. Daily life leaves a different kind of legacy. You walk through a residential neighborhood on the edge of a growing western town during the 1880s. The streets here are calmer than the busy commercial district. Wooden houses stand behind simple fences. Small gardens occupy patches of land between homes. Laundry moves gently in the evening breeze. The atmosphere feels peaceful, comforting, even. Children play outside before sunset. Parents call them home for supper. Dogs wander between yards. The smells of cooking drift from open windows. The scene is ordinary. That is precisely what makes it important. The frontier is no longer merely a destination for adventurers. Increasingly, it is becoming a place where people raise families and build futures. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive census records and historical research, is that women and children played central roles in the development of Western communities. Although popular culture often focuses on male figures, families were essential to the long-term growth and stability of frontier settlements. Without families, towns struggle to endure. Without families, communities remain temporary. You approach a modest wooden house shortly before dinner. The structure is not large. Its walls show signs of weather. The porch remains simple, yet the home feels welcoming. Inside, a family prepares an evening meal. The table is modest. The conversation is lively. A strong sensory moment unfolds as food cooks over a warm stove. The smell of bread fills the room. A pot simmers quietly nearby. Firelight flickers against wooden walls. Outside, cool evening air settles across the neighborhood. The contrast feels comforting. The frontier can be harsh. Home provides shelter from that harshness. You notice an intimate human detail as one child proudly displays schoolwork completed earlier that day. A parent examines it carefully. Encouragement follows. Smiles appear around the table. The moment lasts only seconds, yet thousands of similar moments occur throughout the West. They rarely become historical headlines. They still shape history. Education grows increasingly important as communities mature. Schools appear throughout frontier towns. Teachers arrive from distant regions. Local leaders invest resources despite limited budgets. Parents want opportunities for their children. The desire feels timeless. You visit a schoolhouse during the following morning. Sunlight enters through tall windows. Students sit at wooden desks. Lessons proceed despite occasional distractions from life outside. The building itself is simple. The ambitions inside are not. Education represents confidence in the future. People establish schools because they expect communities to survive. The emotional atmosphere of these frontier families often combines optimism with uncertainty. Opportunities exist. Land remains available in some areas. Businesses continue growing. Yet challenges persist. Weather can be severe. Markets fluctuate. Disease remains a concern. Distances still separate loved ones. The future feels promising but never guaranteed. You encounter a woman managing household responsibilities while her husband works outside town. Historical records reveal that frontier women frequently carried enormous responsibilities. They maintained homes, raised children, managed finances, and contributed to local communities. Their labor often receives less attention than cattle drives or gold discoveries. It deserves recognition. Researchers associated with institutions such as Princeton University and Harvard University have examined the experiences of women on the Western frontier. Historians continue debating how much opportunity Western life provided compared to Eastern communities, since experiences varied significantly depending on location, economic circumstances, and individual backgrounds. No single frontier experience exists. The West contains many realities. Some women find new opportunities. Others encounter familiar limitations. Many experience both. The story remains complex. You continue walking through town. A church bell sounds softly in the distance. Families gather for community events. Neighbors exchange news and assistance. Social organizations begin appearing throughout the settlement. Connections strengthen. Community deepens. The frontier becomes less anonymous. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a neighborhood garden. Fresh vegetables grow in carefully tended rows. Water buckets stand beside simple tools. Children's footprints remain visible in soft soil after recent watering. The scene feels grounded, practical, human. These small efforts sustain larger communities. As afternoon passes, you observe another aspect of family life. Mail arrives from distant states. Residents gather eagerly to collect letters. Some contain good news. Others contain difficult news. All are precious. Communication remains slower than in the modern world, even with expanding railroads and telegraph lines. Many families remain separated by great distances. Letters bridge those gaps, at least partially. One father reads correspondence from relatives back east. His expression shifts between nostalgia and gratitude. He remembers familiar places, yet he also recognizes how much his life has changed. The emotional transition feels subtle but powerful. The frontier is no longer simply where he lives. It has become home. That transformation occurs throughout the West. Settlers, who once planned temporary stays, gradually develop lasting attachments. Children grow up knowing Western towns as their native communities. Local traditions emerge. Shared identities form. Roots deepen. Night approaches once again. Lamps glow behind household windows. Families gather around the tables. Conversations replace the noise of daytime labor. The pace slows, not entirely, but noticeably. You pause along a quiet street and look back toward the town center. Beyond the homes stand businesses, churches, schools, hotels, and railroad facilities. Together, they form a functioning society. The pieces connect. Families support schools, schools support communities, communities support businesses, businesses support growth. Everything influences everything else. The Wild West often appears in memory as a place of constant motion. Wagons moving west, cattle crossing plains, trains racing across continents. Yet another equally important story unfolds through stillness. A family remaining in one place, a child attending school, a garden growing behind a house, a meal shared at day's end. These moments rarely become legends. They become foundations, and upon those foundations, the frontier continues evolving into something larger, more permanent, and more complicated than the dreamers who first rushed west in search of gold could ever have imagined. The families settle into their homes as evening deepens. Lamps glow behind curtains. Children drift towards sleep. Quiet conversations replace the noise of the day. Yet beyond the edges of these growing towns, another story continues unfolding. A story far older than the frontier settlements themselves. Long before gold seekers arrived. Long before railroads crossed the plains. Long before cattle trails stretched northward. The West already belonged to many indigenous nations whose histories reached back centuries, perhaps millennia. As the frontier expands during the 19th century, these worlds increasingly collide. You stand on the Great Plains during the 1860s. The grass stretches toward distant horizons. Wind moves gently across the landscape. Horse tracks cut through the earth. The sky seems endless above. To many newcomers, the land appears open, empty, even. In reality, it is neither. Communities live here. Families live here. Cultures live here. The land carries memory. The frontier story cannot be fully understood without recognizing this reality. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive historical research is that westward expansion dramatically affected indigenous nations across North America. Settlement, railroad construction, military campaigns, changing economic systems, and federal policies transformed native communities throughout the 19th century. The consequences are profound and enduring. You travel beside a wagon road crossing territory long used by indigenous peoples. Settlers move westward, seeking opportunity. At the same time, native communities face growing pressure upon lands that support their economies, traditions, and ways of life. The tension is difficult to avoid. Both groups often view the future through entirely different perspectives. The settlers see possibility. Many native communities see disruption. Both perceptions contain truth. A strong sensory moment unfolds near a prairie river. Cottonwood trees rustle softly in the breeze. Horses drink from shallow water. Smoke rises from distant camps. Birds circle above open grasslands. The landscape itself remains beautiful. Yet beneath that beauty lies growing uncertainty. The changes arrive steadily. Railroads advance. Towns expand. Hunting patterns shift. New populations continue arriving. The pace of transformation accelerates with each passing decade. You begin noticing how interconnected these developments are. The railroad requires land. Towns require resources, ranches require grazing areas, farms require cultivation. Expansion touches nearly every aspect of Western life. Native communities must constantly adapt to changing conditions. Some seek accommodation, others resist. Many attempt combinations of both. There is no single response. There is no single experience. The West remains too vast and diverse for simple explanations. An intimate human detail emerges during a quiet evening gathering. An elder shares stories with younger listeners. The stories preserve knowledge, history, and cultural memory. Similar scenes have occurred for generations. The practice continues despite uncertainty, because identity matters, memory matters, community matters. These truths remain constant even during periods of immense change. You observe how traditional ways of life encounter increasing challenges. The buffalo herds that once dominated large portions of the plains begin declining dramatically. Hunting pressures increase, environmental conditions change. Expanding settlement alters migration patterns. The effects ripple outward. Entire economies feel the impact. Entire communities feel the impact. One of the most significant transformations of the century unfolds across these grasslands. The loss extends beyond economics. It touches culture, food systems, daily routines, spiritual traditions, relationships with the land. Everything becomes interconnected. Researchers associated with institutions such as Yale University, Stanford University, and the University of Chicago have examined the complex interactions between indigenous nations and expanding frontier societies. Historians continue debating the relative influence of military conflict, economic pressures, environmental change, and federal policy in shaping outcomes across different regions. The debate remains important. The experiences vary greatly. Different nations face different circumstances. Different leaders make different decisions. Different communities encounter different challenges. History rarely follows a single path. You travel near a military post where negotiations are taking place. Government representatives meet with native leaders. Discussions continue for hours. Agreements are proposed. Concerns are raised. Sometimes treaties emerge. Sometimes disputes remain unresolved. The atmosphere feels cautious. No one present fully controls what the future will bring. Promises are made. Expectations form. Events continue changing. The uncertainty affects everyone involved. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a frequently traveled route. Wagon wheel ruts cross older trails used for generations. The marks overlap one another in the soil. The image feels symbolic. Different worlds occupying the same landscape. Different histories sharing the same ground. The emotional transition grows heavier as the years advance. Earlier frontier stories often emphasize opportunity and expansion. Here another perspective becomes visible: loss, adaptation, resilience. Change rarely benefits everyone equally. This reality deserves acknowledgement, yet even amid difficult circumstances. Indigenous communities continue preserving traditions, maintaining identities, and adapting to new realities. Cultural continuity survives despite enormous pressures. That survival matters deeply. Night settles over the plains. Stars emerge above the grasslands, just as they have for countless generations. Wind moves softly across the earth. The landscape appears calm. The history beneath it is not. You pause and reflect upon the complexity of the frontier. It is tempting to view Western expansion through simple narratives of progress or conflict. The truth is more complicated. Human lives always make history complicated. The settlers building homes, the railroad workers laying track, the ranchers moving cattle, the merchants opening stores, the native communities defending traditions, all are part of the same story. All influence one another. All help shape the future of the West as darkness deepens. The prairie seems almost timeless. Yet you know immense changes are unfolding across the horizon. The frontier continues expanding. Towns continue growing. Railroads continue advancing. And indigenous nations continue navigating one of the most challenging periods in their histories. The Wild West is not merely a story of opportunity. It is also a story of encounter, of transformation, of difficult choices, of competing visions for the future. And understanding that complexity brings you closer to understanding the real frontier than any legend ever could. The prairie lies quiet beneath the stars. Wind moves through the grass. Distant campfires flicker against the darkness, yet across much of the frontier. Another presence has become increasingly familiar. The military post, the western fort, the lonely outpost standing between vast distances. As settlement expands, railroads advance, and conflicts emerge across different regions. Military installations become important parts of frontier life. Some are little more than clusters of wooden buildings. Others grow into substantial complexes supporting hundreds of soldiers. Together, they help shape the developing West. You arrive at a frontier fort shortly before sunrise during the 1870s. The air feels cold and crisp. Wooden walls cast long shadows across the ground. Horses stand quietly inside corrals. Smoke rises from chimneys as cooks begin preparing breakfast. The fort is already awake. Military life follows schedules. Schedules begin early. A bugle call echoes through the morning air. Doors open. Boots strike packed earth. The day begins. The atmosphere feels disciplined but not glamorous. Popular imagination often pictures frontier soldiers constantly engaged in dramatic battles. In reality, much of military life involves routine duties, patrols, maintenance, training, paperwork, construction. The ordinary occupies far more time than the extraordinary. One widely accepted historical fact supported by military records is that Western forts served multiple functions beyond combat operations. They protected transportation routes, supported communication networks, supplied military units, and often became important centers of regional activity. The forts help connect distant parts of the frontier. They become landmarks in immense landscapes. You walk through the fort as soldiers prepare for inspection. Uniforms are brushed clean. Equipment is organized carefully. Horses receive attention from experienced handlers. Everything has its place, or at least it is supposed to. Military organizations value order. The frontier often resists it. The tension between those realities creates many challenges. A strong sensory moment unfolds inside a barracks building. The smell of wood smoke mixes with leather and wool. Morning light enters through simple windows. Rows of bunks line the walls. Personal belongings occupy small spaces beside sleeping areas. The room feels practical. Nothing more, nothing less. Many soldiers spend years stationed far from major cities. Some come willingly. Others view frontier assignments as obligations rather than opportunities. Either way, the work continues. You accompany a patrol leaving the fort shortly after breakfast. Horses move steadily across open country. The landscape stretches outward in every direction. Hills rise gently beyond the horizon. Rivers cut narrow paths through the terrain. The distances are astonishing. A single patrol may cover dozens of miles. Communication remains difficult. Isolation remains common. The frontier constantly reminds people how large the continent truly is. An intimate human detail emerges during a midday rest. One soldier removes a folded letter from his pocket and reads it again while sitting beneath a cottonwood tree. The paper has clearly been read many times before. The corners are worn. The folds are soft. The words remain important. Letters continue serving as emotional lifelines. Distance separates families. Correspondence helps bridge that separation, at least a little. The emotional atmosphere among the soldiers often combines boredom and vigilance. Days may pass without significant events, then circumstances can change rapidly. This unpredictability shapes frontier military life. Patience becomes essential. So does preparedness. You return to the fort during the afternoon. Blacksmiths repair equipment. Quartermasters manage supplies. Officers review reports arriving from other locations. The installation functions like a small community. Many civilian workers contribute as well. Families sometimes live nearby. Businesses often develop around military posts. The influence extends beyond military operations alone. Researchers associated with institutions such as Harvard University and Princeton University have examined the role of Western forts in frontier development. Historians continue debating whether these installations should primarily be viewed as instruments of federal authority or as broader community centers that helped facilitate settlement and transportation across remote regions. Both interpretations contain important insights. The forts serve multiple purposes. History rarely fits neatly into single categories. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near the stables. Saddles hang neatly from wooden racks. Horses shift patiently in their stalls. The smell of hay fills the air. Hoof prints cover the ground outside. The fort depends heavily upon animals, before automobiles and aircraft. Horses remain essential tools of mobility. Everything takes longer without them. Everything becomes harder without them as evening approaches. Daily routines continue. Guards assume positions, cooks prepare meals, officers complete paperwork. Soldiers clean equipment before darkness settles across the landscape. The work feels repetitive, because much of it is, yet repetition creates readiness. Military organizations understand this principle well. You share supper with several soldiers seated outside a barracks building. The meal is simple. The conversation is relaxed. Topics range from weather and horses to families and future plans. Laughter appears occasionally. So does homesickness. Human emotions remain remarkably consistent across generations. Uniforms do not change that. Night arrives gradually. Lanterns glow along pathways inside the fort. Beyond the perimeter stretches open darkness. The prairie seems endless beneath the stars. The contrast feels striking. Order within, vastness beyond. The emotional transition becomes noticeable as you observe the fort after sunset. Earlier sections of the Wild West story focused on migration, mining, ranching, and town building. Here you encounter another layer of frontier development. Institutional presence, government authority, national expansion. The West is becoming increasingly integrated into broader systems of administration and control. The process remains incomplete, but it continues steadily. You stand near the parade ground and listen to the sounds of evening. Horses move quietly in the distance. Conversations drift from nearby buildings. Wind brushes gently against wooden walls. The fort feels isolated, yet it is connected to a much larger story. A story involving transportation, communication, settlement, conflict, and growth. The soldiers sleeping here tonight may never become famous. Most names will fade from memory. Most careers will pass without dramatic moments. Yet their presence helps shape the frontier. Their patrols connect regions. Their labor supports institutions. Their forts anchor distant landscapes. And as the 19th century moves forward, these outposts continue standing watch across a West that remains vast, complicated, and forever in motion. The frontier fort settles into silence as the night deepens. Lanterns dim. Guards continue their rounds. Horses rest quietly beneath the stars. Beyond the walls stretches a landscape that has shaped every chapter of this story. The land itself, the grasslands, the rivers, the mountains, the wildlife. For decades, people have crossed these environments seeking wealth, opportunity, security, and adventure. Yet the West is not simply a stage upon which human events occur. It is an active participant. And by the 1870s and 1880s, the environment is changing rapidly. You stand on the Great Plains at sunrise. Golden light spreads across rolling grasslands. Wind moves through countless blades of prairie grass. The horizon appears almost limitless. At first glance, the scene feels timeless, but it is not. The landscape you see is already different from the one that existed a generation earlier. Human activity is reshaping the West, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, always significantly. One of the most dramatic examples involves the buffalo. For centuries, immense herds have moved across the plains. Travelers often describe scenes almost beyond imagination. Animals stretch from one horizon to another. Their movements shape ecosystems. Their presence influences countless forms of life. The buffalo is more than an animal. It is a force, a defining feature of the Great Plains. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive historical and environmental research is that buffalo populations declined dramatically during the 19th century. Hunting, commercial demand, environmental pressures, and expanding settlement all contributed to this transformation. The consequences reach far beyond wildlife. Entire ecosystems feel the impact. Entire communities feel the impact. You ride across the plains and notice how the landscape bears signs of increasing human activity. Railroad tracks cross regions once dominated by animal migration routes. Ranch fences begin appearing in areas previously left open. Towns expand steadily. The frontier is becoming more structured, more organized, less wild. The process unfolds gradually, yet its effects accumulate. A strong sensory moment emerges during a ride across open prairie. The scent of sun-warmed grass drifts through the air. Insects hum softly among wildflowers. Distant thunderheads gather far across the horizon. Horse hooves produce a steady rhythm against the earth. The beauty remains undeniable. The change remains undeniable, too. You encounter a group of ranchers discussing grazing conditions. Their concerns reveal another aspect of environmental transformation. More cattle now occupy portions of the plains. Water sources become increasingly important. Grassland management grows more complicated. Economic success depends upon environmental health. The relationship is direct and sometimes fragile. The emotional atmosphere surrounding these changes is mixed. Many settlers view development positively. Farms expand, businesses grow, transportation improves, opportunities multiply. Others notice losses. Open spaces become smaller, wildlife becomes less abundant. Traditional patterns disappear. Both perspectives contain truth. History often involves such tensions. An intimate human detail appears as an older rancher reflects upon the landscape he first encountered years earlier. He remembers larger buffalo herds. He remembers fewer settlements. He remembers longer distances between communities. The memories carry no simple judgment, only observation. He has witnessed change firsthand. Few experiences alter perspective more profoundly than watching a region transform around you. Researchers associated with institutions such as Stanford University and the University of California have explored how environmental changes shaped Western development. Historians continue debating whether frontier expansion should primarily be viewed as a process of environmental conquest, environmental adaptation, or some combination of both. The debate remains important. The evidence suggests complexity. Human beings reshape landscapes. Landscapes reshape human behavior. The relationship works both ways. You travel toward a growing agricultural region. Fields replace portions of native grassland. Irrigation systems appear in some areas. Farmers experiment with techniques designed to make difficult environments more productive. The effort requires persistence. Nature does not always cooperate. Droughts occur. Floods occur. Harsh winters occur. The environment remains powerful. Even railroads and towns cannot fully control it. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a farming community. Windmills turn steadily above water wells. Fresh furrows cut through soil. Wooden fences divide land into organized parcels. The visual contrast with earlier frontier landscapes is striking. The open range is gradually changing. Boundaries become more common. Ownership becomes more visible. The emotional transition grows stronger as afternoon fades toward evening. Earlier sections of the Wild West story emphasize expansion into seemingly endless spaces. Increasingly, those spaces no longer feel endless. Development narrows distances. Settlement fills gaps. The frontier becomes less frontier, at least in some regions, yet wilderness remains. Mountains still tower above valleys. Deserts still challenge travelers. Storms still command respect. The West remains vast even as it changes. You pause beside a river flowing through cottonwood groves. The water moves with quiet confidence. Birds settle among branches. Reflections shimmer beneath fading sunlight. The river has witnessed everything. Gold seekers, settlers, soldiers, ranchers, railroad workers, generations passing through. The thought feels humbling. Human history often unfolds quickly. Natural history unfolds more slowly. The two timelines intersect constantly. Night approaches. Cool air settles across the landscape. The sky gradually darkens. Stars begin appearing overhead. The prairie remains beautiful. The mountains remain beautiful. The rivers remain beautiful. Yet they are no longer exactly what they once were. The West is evolving, not only socially, not only economically, environmentally as well. The changes affect everyone. The rancher managing cattle, the farmer cultivating crops, the railroad company laying track, the native communities adapting to new realities, the growing towns depending upon natural resources. No one stands entirely apart from the landscape. Everyone depends upon it. Everyone influences it. As darkness settles across the plains, you reflect upon a simple truth. The Wild West is often remembered through its people. Cowboys, lawmen, outlaws, settlers. Yet the land itself deserves equal attention. Without the grasslands, there are no cattle trails. Without the rivers, there are no mining camps. Without the mountains, there is no gold rush. Without the vast spaces, there is no frontier. The environment shapes the story from beginning to end. And as the 19th century advances, both the people and the land continue changing together. The river continues flowing through the darkness. The prairie stretches beneath the stars. Wind moves softly across the grasslands that have witnessed decades of transformation. Yet the story of Western wealth is far from finished. Gold began this journey. Now another treasure captures attention, silver. And once again, people begin moving toward the promise of sudden fortune. By the late 19th century, major silver discoveries create new waves of migration and investment throughout portions of the American West. The familiar pattern returns. Rumors spread, investors arrive, towns grow, dreams multiply. The frontier seems determined to repeat itself. You arrive in a mining district high in the mountains during the 1870s. The air feels cooler here. Pine forests cover steep slopes. Rocky ridges rise above narrow valleys. The landscape feels rugged and dramatic, a place of beauty and difficulty. Mining communities often appear in challenging environments. Valuable minerals rarely choose convenient locations. People follow the wealth anyway. The town before you clings to a mountainside. Buildings crowd narrow streets. Wagons struggle along steep roads. New arrivals continue pouring into the settlement. Everyone hopes to benefit from the discoveries. Not everyone will. History has shown that lesson repeatedly. Still, hope remains powerful. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive economic and historical research, is that major silver discoveries, including those in Nevada and Colorado, contributed significantly to Western economic growth during the second half of the 19th century. These discoveries attracted investment, labor, transportation networks, and new settlements. The effects spread far beyond the mines themselves. Banks expand, railroads grow, merchants prosper, construction accelerates. The entire regional economy feels the impact. You walk through the mining town early in the morning. Workers move purposefully toward the hills. Supply wagons carry equipment and provisions. Business owners prepare for another busy day. The atmosphere feels familiar. The details are different. The pattern remains recognizable. Resource discoveries continue driving frontier expansion. A strong sensory moment unfolds near the entrance to a mining operation. Cold mountain air mixes with the smell of damp earth. Steel tools strike rock with sharp echoes. Steam-powered machinery produces rhythmic sounds that roll across the valley. The mountains answer with echoes. The entire landscape seems alive with activity. Mining technology has evolved since the earliest days of the California gold rush. Individual prospectors still exist, but larger operations become increasingly common. Investors provide capital. Companies organize labor. Equipment grows more sophisticated. The frontier economy becomes more complex. Opportunity increasingly requires organization. The emotional atmosphere of the town reflects both excitement and uncertainty. Silver prices influence fortunes. New discoveries create optimism. Unexpected setbacks create anxiety. Nothing feels guaranteed. The future remains unpredictable. You enter a busy bank where investors discuss opportunities. Maps cover walls. Financial documents occupy desks. Conversations revolve around production estimates, transportation costs, and market conditions. The frontier is maturing. speculation remains important. So does business expertise. The two often travel together. An intimate human detail appears when a miner writes a letter home after receiving his wages. He describes mountain scenery. He describes difficult work. He describes hopes for the future. He avoids mentioning certain worries. Many people do. Letters often emphasize optimism, even during uncertain times. The habit feels understandable. You continue through town and notice how prosperity influences daily life. New buildings appear. Better roads are constructed. Businesses offer more goods than earlier frontier settlements could provide. Success creates visible changes, not only for the wealthy, for entire communities. Yet prosperity remains unevenly distributed. Some individuals accumulate significant fortunes. Others continue struggling despite long hours of labor. The frontier rewards some dreams. It disappoints others. Researchers associated with institutions such as Harvard University and Yale University have examined the economic effects of Western mining booms. Historians continue debating how broadly mining wealth benefited local populations versus concentrating advantages among investors. Corporations and transportation interests. The evidence varies considerably. Different communities experience different outcomes. No simple answer exists. The mountains resist simplicity. So does history. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a railroad spur serving the mining district. Freight cars wait to receive ore. Wooden platforms support heavy equipment. Tracks curve carefully through difficult terrain. Transportation remains essential. Without railroads, large-scale mining becomes far more difficult. The connections established during earlier decades continue proving valuable. Everything links together. Mining, railroads, towns, markets, investment. The frontier increasingly functions as an integrated system. The emotional transition becomes noticeable as evening approaches. Earlier sections of the Wild West story focused heavily on exploration and settlement. Here you encounter something slightly different. Consolidation. Expansion is continuing, yet institutions are becoming stronger. Businesses are becoming larger. Economic networks are becoming more sophisticated. The West is growing up, without entirely losing its frontier character. Night settles over the mountain town. Lights appear in windows along steep streets. Restaurants fill with workers finishing long days. Hotel lobbies buzz with conversation about mining prospects and market prices. The atmosphere feels optimistic, at least for tonight. Tomorrow may bring different news. Commodity prices fluctuate. Discoveries disappoint. Investments fail. Such realities accompany every boom. Yet hope persists. Hope always persists. You pause at the edge of town and look toward the mountains rising against the star-filled sky. Somewhere within those ridges lie the minerals attracting thousands of people. Silver, just another metal, and yet powerful enough to influence migrations, economies, and communities. The pattern feels familiar because it is familiar. The West continues reinventing itself through cycles of opportunity. Gold created one chapter. Silver creates another. Each discovery draws new dreamers. Each dreamer adds another thread to the larger story. And as the 19th century moves closer toward its final years, the frontier continues evolving into something increasingly connected, increasingly prosperous, and increasingly complex. The age of sudden fortunes is not over, but the age of the open frontier is beginning to change, slowly, steadily, almost invisibly, like a mountain town growing beneath the shadow of silver-rich peaks. The silver towns glow beneath mountain skies. Railroads carry ore toward distant markets. Investors study reports. Merchants count profits. Across the West, communities continue growing. Some remain small. Some disappear. A few become famous, very famous, long after their busiest years have passed. Certain frontier towns continue living in public memory. Their names become symbols of the Wild West itself. Dodge City, Tombstone, Deadwood, Abilene, and others. These places occupy a special place in Western history because they seem to contain every element people associate with the frontier. Cowboys, railroads, businesses, lawmen, outlaws, opportunity, risk. The reality is more complicated than the legends. The reality is also more interesting. You arrive in Dodge City during the late 19th century. The town sits amid vast grasslands connected to cattle trails and railroad networks. The streets are busy with merchants, travelers, ranchers, and workers. At first glance, it resembles many other growing Western communities. That observation matters. Because famous towns are still towns. People live here, work here, raise families here. The legends emerge later. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive historical records, is that towns such as Dodge City became important transportation and commercial centers because of their connections to cattle drives and railroad networks. Their economic significance helped fuel population growth and public attention. Success attracts notice. Notice attracts stories. Stories create legends. You walk down the main street shortly after midday. Wagons move steadily through traffic. Businesses display merchandise in storefront windows. Restaurants serve customers arriving from nearby ranches and distant cities. The atmosphere feels energetic, but not chaotic. Popular imagination often pictures constant disorder. Daily life usually appears far more organized. A strong sensory moment unfolds outside a busy railroad depot. Steam drifts from an arriving locomotive. Horses snort beside crowded wagons. Dust rises beneath countless boots. The scent of coal smoke mixes with the smell of leather and wood. The town feels alive, everywhere. Movement continues. Passengers arrive. Freight departs. Opportunities emerge. You notice how different groups interact within the same spaces. Ranchers discuss cattle prices. Merchants negotiate supply contracts. Travelers seek accommodations. Local residents conduct ordinary business. The famous frontier town functions because thousands of routine transactions occur every week. The extraordinary depends upon the ordinary. An intimate human detail appears in a small photography studio. A family gathers carefully for a portrait. Clothing is adjusted. Expressions become serious. The photographer prepares equipment. The moment feels significant because it is. A photograph preserves identity. It captures belonging years later. Descendants may study the image and wonder about the lives represented within it. The famous town contains countless private stories hidden behind public legends. You continue toward Tombstone in the Arizona Territory. The environment changes dramatically. Dry landscapes replace portions of the grasslands. Rocky hills rise above the settlement. Sunlight reflects brightly from dusty streets. The town owes much of its growth to mining, like so many Western communities. Economic opportunity fuels expansion. Without resources, the settlement remains small. With resources, it grows rapidly. The pattern repeats throughout the frontier. Researchers associated with institutions such as Stanford University and Princeton University have examined why certain Western towns achieved lasting fame while others faded from public memory. Historians continue debating whether economic importance, media attention, dramatic events, or later popular culture played the greatest role in shaping modern perceptions. The answer likely includes all of these factors. History and memory rarely follow identical paths. Some towns become symbols. Others remain historical footnotes. You visit a newspaper office where editors discuss local events. They understand the value of compelling stories. Readers want information. They also want excitement. The distinction matters. News shapes reputation. Reputation shapes memory. Memory shapes legend. The process unfolds gradually. A physically grounded detail catches your attention along a wooden boardwalk after a recent rainstorm. Mud fills wagon ruts. Footprints cross damp earth. Water drips from building roofs. The evidence of everyday activity covers every surface. The town feels real, not mythological. Real towns leave real traces. The emotional transition becomes noticeable as evening approaches. Throughout this journey, you have witnessed mining camps becoming settlements, settlements becoming towns, and towns becoming communities. Now you encounter another transformation, communities becoming symbols. The change happens largely through storytelling. People begin viewing certain places as representatives of the entire frontier experience. The symbolism grows stronger over time. Night settles across the streets. Lanterns glow from hotels, restaurants, stores, and gathering places. Conversations drift through cool air. A train whistle sounds in the distance. The scene feels familiar. Many frontier towns experience evenings exactly like this one. Yet, future generations will remember some locations more vividly than others. You pause and reflect upon why. Perhaps the names are memorable. Perhaps dramatic events occurred there. Perhaps writers and journalists found compelling material. Perhaps later generations simply needed symbols. Human beings often understand large histories through specific places. The famous towns become windows into larger stories. Dodge City represents the cattle frontier. Tombstone represents mining communities and frontier conflict. Deadwood represents boomtown growth. Each location reflects broader historical themes. None tells the entire story alone. Together, they reveal important pieces. The emotional atmosphere grows quieter as darkness deepens. The busy streets gradually empty. Businesses close, residents return home, travelers settle into hotel rooms after long journeys. Ordinary life resumes, as it always does. The famous frontier towns remind you of something important. History is rarely created by isolated moments. It emerges through accumulation, years of labor, years of migration, years of commerce, years of community building. The legends may focus on dramatic episodes. The reality rests upon foundations constructed by countless ordinary people. And yet the legends serve a purpose too. They preserve memory. They spark curiosity. They encourage future generations to look more closely at the real history behind the stories. The Wild West is approaching the end of one era. Its most famous towns stand as monuments to everything that came before. The gold seekers, the railroad builders, the cowboys, the families, the dreamers, all leaving traces behind in communities that continue living long after the frontier itself begins to fade. The famous frontier towns glow softly beneath the night sky. Their streets carry memories of miners, ranchers, merchants, soldiers, and travelers who helped shape the American West. Yet as the 1880s progress, a subtle transformation begins unfolding across the frontier. At first, many people barely notice it. There is no single day when the change becomes obvious, no dramatic moment, no sudden ending. Instead, the transformation arrives gradually, fence by fence, farm by farm, town by town. The open frontier that once seemed endless is beginning to close. You stand on a stretch of prairie that earlier generations would have recognized instantly. Vast grasslands extend toward distant horizons. Wind moves through the tall grass. The sky remains enormous, yet something is different now. Wooden fences divide portions of the landscape. Farmhouses appear where open range once dominated. Roads become more established. Settlements appear more frequently. The spaces between communities are shrinking. The West is becoming more crowded, not crowded by modern standards, but noticeably different from the frontier of earlier decades. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive historical research, is that population growth, agricultural expansion, railroad development, and increasing settlement transformed much of the western frontier during the late 19th century. Areas once considered remote gradually became integrated into broader economic and social systems. The change affects everything: transportation, business, land ownership, daily life. The frontier itself begins evolving into something new. You ride beside a rancher crossing territory where cattle once moved freely across enormous distances. Barbed wire fences now define property boundaries. Gates regulate movement. Ownership becomes visible in ways earlier generations rarely experienced. The impact is profound. The open range is no longer quite so open. A strong sensory moment unfolds during a late afternoon ride. Dry grass brushes against fence posts. Wind rattles strands of wire stretched across the prairie. Horse hooves strike packed earth along a well-traveled road. The sounds are small. The significance is enormous. A simple fence represents a major historical shift. Land that once seemed limitless increasingly acquires boundaries. Boundaries create order. They also create change. The emotional atmosphere surrounding these developments is mixed. Many settlers welcome greater stability. Defined property lines reduce disputes. Farms become easier to manage. Investments feel more secure. Others feel differently. Some ranchers miss the freedoms of the open range. Some travelers notice the disappearance of older frontier landscapes. The transformation creates both opportunities and nostalgia. Both reactions make sense. History often produces conflicting emotions. An intimate human detail emerges when an older cowboy pauses to study a familiar stretch of prairie. He remembers driving cattle across these lands years earlier. The fences now standing before him would have seemed unimaginable during his youth. He does not necessarily oppose the changes. He simply recognizes them. Recognition carries its own emotional weight. The frontier he once knew is fading. You continue traveling through agricultural communities expanding across the West. New farms appear. Irrigation systems improve productivity in certain regions. Rural schools serve growing populations. Churches and local governments become increasingly established. The landscape feels more settled, more permanent, more connected. The pace of change remains remarkable. Researchers associated with institutions such as Harvard University and the University of Chicago have examined how agricultural development reshaped Western society during the late 19th century. Historians continue debating the extent to which technological innovation, government policy, transportation networks, and migration patterns each contributed to the closing of the frontier. The factors overlap considerably. No single cause explains everything. Large historical changes rarely result from one influence alone. You notice how railroads continue accelerating these developments. Areas once isolated now participate in national markets. Farmers ship crops long distances. Merchants receive goods from distant cities. Information circulates rapidly compared to earlier decades. Distance keeps shrinking. The psychological effect matters almost as much as the physical one. Places that once felt remote begin feeling accessible. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a growing farming community. Telegraph poles follow the road toward the horizon. Grain storage facilities stand beside railroad tracks. Freshly painted buildings line the main street. The scene would have surprised many early gold seekers. The West is becoming organized, systematic, predictable, at least more predictable than before. The emotional transition grows stronger as evening approaches. Throughout this journey, you have followed people pursuing opportunity across immense landscapes. Their experiences often depend upon uncertainty. Will gold be found? Will the cattle drive succeed? Will the town survive? The questions define frontier life. Increasingly, different questions emerge. How can businesses expand? How can communities improve schools? How can transportation become more efficient? The focus begins shifting. Exploration gives way to development. Development gives way to management. The frontier matures. Night settles over the countryside. Lights appear in farmhouses scattered across the landscape. Trains move steadily through darkness. Roads remain active with travelers and freight wagons. The West still feels large, yet it no longer feels limitless. That distinction matters. You pause beside a fence line and look toward the distant horizon. The stars overhead appear unchanged. The wind still moves through the grass. The land remains beautiful. Yet human relationships with that land have evolved dramatically. Ownership has expanded. Institutions have strengthened. Communities have multiplied. The transformation feels irreversible. Many residents recognize this reality. Some celebrate it. Some mourn aspects of what has been lost. Many feel both emotions simultaneously. The Wild West is not disappearing overnight. But the conditions that created the classic frontier experience are gradually becoming less common. The open spaces remain. The frontier spirit remains. The world itself is changing. And as the 19th century approaches its final years, people increasingly realize they are witnessing the end of an era. Not the end of the West. The end of a particular version of the West. A version defined by vast open ranges, rapid expansion, and seemingly endless frontiers waiting beyond the next horizon. The future is arriving, quietly, steadily, one fence post at a time. The fence line stretches into the distance beneath a sky filled with stars. Farms continue spreading across the landscape. Railroads connect once isolated communities. Frontier towns grow into established cities. The Wild West is changing. Yet something unexpected is happening at the same time. Even as the frontier becomes more settled, people begin transforming it into legend. The process starts long before the 19th century ends. In fact, it is already underway. While cowboys still ride, while trains still arrive, while mining camps still operate, stories are growing larger than life. The myth of the Wild West begins forming before the real West has fully disappeared. You find yourself inside a newspaper office during the late 1880s. The room buzzes with activity. Editors sort reports from distant towns. Printers prepare fresh editions. Writers search for stories that will capture public attention. Facts matter. Attention matters too. The balance between those two goals shapes countless frontier narratives. One widely accepted historical fact supported by extensive historical scholarship is that newspapers, popular magazines, public lectures, and inexpensive novels played major roles in creating national images of the American West during the 19th century. The West becomes a story, not merely a place, and stories travel faster than reality. You watch an editor reviewing reports from several frontier communities. Most involve ordinary events, business transactions, community meetings, agricultural developments, transportation updates, useful information, important information, not especially exciting information. Then another report arrives. A robbery, a confrontation, a daring escape. Immediately, interest increases. Human nature reveals itself. People often remember the unusual more readily than the routine. A strong sensory moment unfolds inside the printing room. The smell of fresh ink fills the air. Printing presses rumble steadily. Stacks of paper wait beside work tables. Lantern light reflects from metal type. The machinery transforms events into narratives. The narratives travel outward. The stories grow. You begin noticing how repetition influences memory. A single dramatic event attracts attention. Repeated dramatic stories create expectations. Eventually, readers begin imagining the entire frontier through a relatively small collection of memorable incidents. The process happens gradually, almost invisibly, yet its effects become enormous. The reality of the West includes millions of ordinary days. The mythology often focuses on exceptional moments. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. One is simply more dramatic. An intimate human detail emerges when a young reader eagerly purchases a newly printed story about Western adventure. He has never visited the frontier. He may never visit the frontier, yet the stories shape his imagination. The West becomes real to him through words. Many people experience the region this way. Popular literature plays a powerful role. Writers discover that Western themes attract audiences. Tales of cowboys, outlaws, lawmen, and frontier challenges become increasingly popular. Readers enjoy stories involving courage, danger, freedom, and adventure. The demand encourages more production. The cycle reinforces itself. Reality inspires stories. Stories reshape perceptions of reality. Researchers associated with institutions such as Yale University and Stanford University have examined how popular culture contributed to the creation of Western mythology. Historians continue debating whether these stories primarily distorted public understanding or preserved important cultural values associated with frontier experiences. The debate remains fascinating. The answer likely includes elements of both. Stories simplify. Stories also preserve. The challenge lies in recognizing the difference. You attend a public lecture where a former frontier resident describes life in the West. The audience listens attentively. Some details are accurate. Others may be slightly exaggerated. The speaker understands something important. A good story requires engagement. Perfect precision is not always the highest priority. The audience wants meaning, not merely information. This tendency influences historical memory everywhere, not only in the American West. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near a railway station newsstand. Newspapers from distant cities display Western headlines. Popular novels featuring frontier themes occupy prominent positions. Travelers browse the selections before boarding trains. The West is becoming a national fascination. People who never see the plains still feel connected to them, at least through imagination. The emotional transition grows stronger as you reflect upon the process. Earlier sections of this journey focused on events as they unfolded. Gold discoveries, cattle drives, railroad construction, town building. Now you witness another stage: interpretation, memory, myth-making. Human beings naturally search for meaning in historical change. The frontier provides abundant material: freedom, opportunity, risk, self-reliance, adventure. These themes resonate deeply. Night settles over the city where publishers, editors, and readers continue exchanging stories. Electric lights begin appearing in some areas. Technology advances. Society changes. Yet interest in the frontier remains strong, perhaps even stronger than before. The timing feels significant as the actual frontier becomes less open. Public fascination increases. Distance often enhances nostalgia. People begin celebrating aspects of the West that are already disappearing. The process feels familiar. Many societies romanticize eras as they fade. You pause and consider how legends are constructed. Rarely through deliberate deception, more often through selection. Certain stories receive attention, others receive less attention over time. The remembered version of history becomes different from the lived version. Not entirely false, not entirely complete. Something in between. The Wild West experiences this transformation while many participants are still alive. Cowboys read stories about cowboys. Lawmen encounter legends inspired by real lawmen. Frontier residents observe their own experiences becoming mythology. The situation feels almost surreal. Yet it happens, the emotional atmosphere becomes reflective. You realize that future generations will inherit two versions of the West: the historical West, the legendary West. Both will influence culture. Both will shape memory. Understanding the distinction requires effort. The rewards justify that effort, because the real frontier is every bit as fascinating as the myths, perhaps more so, as darkness deepens and printing presses continue their work. The legends spread farther across the nation. The stories will travel into the 20th century and beyond. Some details will change. Some themes will endure. And the Wild West will become more than a historical period. It will become an idea, a symbol, a powerful chapter in the national imagination that continues growing long after the frontier itself begins fading into history. The printing presses continue their steady rhythm through the night. Stories travel outward across the nation. Legends spread from town to town, from city to city, from one generation to the next. And now, as the 19th century approaches its final years, you find yourself looking back across the entire journey. The Wild West is no longer simply a frontier. It is becoming a memory, a powerful memory, one that will endure long after the last cattle drives fade into history and the final boomtowns settle into quieter lives. You stand on a hill overlooking a western town shortly before dawn. The streets below remain mostly silent. A few lanterns still glow in windows. Beyond the town stretch farms, ranches, railroad tracks, and distant mountains. The landscape tells a story of transformation. Just a few decades earlier, much of this region seemed unimaginably distant to many Americans. News traveled slowly, settlements were scattered, the future remained uncertain. Then came the gold discoveries, the migrations, the mining camps, the cattle trails, the railroads, the towns, the families, the fortunes gained and lost. The frontier changed everything it touched. One widely accepted historical fact, supported by extensive historical research, is that the period between the California gold rush and the closing decades of the 19th century witnessed some of the most rapid social, economic, and geographic transformations in American history. The pace of change was extraordinary. Entire communities appeared where none had existed. Transportation networks crossed vast distances. Regional economies became connected to national markets. Millions of lives were affected. You reflect upon the countless individuals who participated in this story. Most never became famous. Most names disappeared from public memory. Yet their contributions remain everywhere. The miner searching cold riverbeds. The merchant opening a store. The teacher instructing children. The railroad worker laying track. The rancher managing cattle. The soldier stationed at a remote fort. The family building a home. Together, they created the West. History often celebrates famous figures. Real change usually comes from ordinary people. A strong sensory moment unfolds as the first light of morning begins touching the horizon. Cool air drifts across the hillside. Birds stir among nearby trees. The distant whistle of a train echoes softly through the valley below. The sound feels symbolic, a reminder of how much the frontier has changed. The railroad once represented a bold new future. Now it has become part of everyday life. So many frontier innovations have followed a similar path. Extraordinary becomes ordinary. New becomes familiar. An intimate human detail emerges as a farmer begins his day before sunrise. He steps outside his home and studies the fields stretching beyond the town. The land feels familiar to him. His children were born here. His neighbors live nearby. This is not a frontier outpost in his mind. It is simply home. That realization captures something important. The Wild West did not disappear because people abandoned it. The Wild West changed because people succeeded in building lasting communities. Success transformed the frontier. The very achievements settlers sought eventually altered the conditions that made frontier life distinctive. Researchers associated with institutions such as Harvard University, Yale University, and Stanford University have examined the enduring legacy of Western expansion in American culture. Historians continue debating which aspects of frontier experience most strongly shaped national identity, including ideas related to independence, opportunity, mobility, and adaptation. The debate continues because the influence remains significant. The West helped shape how Americans understood themselves, and perhaps how they still understand themselves. The emotional transition deepens as you consider the complexity of the story. Earlier generations often described the frontier through simple narratives of progress and adventure. Modern historians recognize a more complicated reality. Opportunity existed, so did hardship. Growth occurred, so did loss. Communities flourished. Conflicts emerged. The truth includes all of these elements. The real history is richer because of its complexity. A physically grounded detail catches your attention near the edge of town. Old wagon ruts remain visible beside newer roads. Telegraph poles stand near railroad tracks. Buildings from different decades occupy the same street. The layers of history exist side by side. Past and present overlap. The landscape remembers. You think back to the beginning of this journey. The discovery of a few bright flakes in a California river helped unleash forces that transformed a continent. At the time, no one could fully understand the consequences. Few historical moments reveal their significance immediately. Only later do patterns become visible. Only later does the larger story emerge. The Wild West leaves behind more than towns and railroads. It leaves behind symbols. The cowboy, the frontier town, the open range, the determined pioneer. These images continue shaping popular imagination long after the original era ends. Sometimes the symbols oversimplify reality. Sometimes they preserve important truths. Most often they do a little of both. Night has fully given way to morning now. Sunlight spreads gradually across the valley. Businesses prepare to open. Trains continue moving. Families begin another ordinary day. The frontier has become part of history, yet its influence remains present. The lessons endure: adaptation, resilience, ambition, community, the willingness to face uncertainty. These themes continue speaking across generations. You stand quietly for a final moment and look across the landscape. The rivers still flow. The mountains still rise against the horizon. The grasslands still stretch toward distant skies. Much has changed. Much remains. That balance feels fitting. History is never entirely lost. It survives in places. Memories, traditions, and stories. The Wild West survives too. Not exactly as it was, not exactly as the legends describe it, but as a remarkable chapter in human experience. A chapter filled with dreamers and workers. Successes and failures, movement and settlement, hardship and hope. A chapter that helped shape a nation, and a chapter that continues inviting curious travelers, even sleepy ones, to look back across the years and wonder what it must have felt like to stand at the edge of a vast horizon and believe that almost anything might still be possible. As tonight's journey comes to a close, take a moment to think about which part of the Wild West stayed with you most. Perhaps it was the gold seekers kneeling beside cold rivers. Perhaps it was the endless cattle trails crossing open grasslands. Maybe it was the families building homes, the railroad workers connecting distant worlds, or the frontier towns growing from dust into communities. If you enjoyed this story, share in the comments which chapter fascinated you the most and what historical journey you would like to explore next. Reading your thoughts helps shape future adventures and keeps this community of history lovers growing. And when you are ready for another relaxing journey through the past, be sure to continue to the next video on the channel, where another forgotten world is waiting to welcome you. Until then, thank you for spending this quiet time together beneath the wide skies of history. Blessings to you and your family.